Conscious Monkeys. So I just got out of recording this episode with Esoteric Eddie, and this is the first time I'm doing this, and I might have to do this more frequently, which is telling you guys about my reaction to this podcast because I've just, dude, I can't even put the words to it. This was a wild conversation. Dude, we went from going from Aramaic, like Bible, talking about the Bible to like transitioning it into like the Anunnaki theorem, which is all about ancient aliens and alien astronauts, and if aliens helped to create civilization as we know it. And we went all the way into like modern day physics, talking about like these crazy theorems that I didn't even know existed that try to take Newtonian physics and actually explain it in like the modern era. And dude, this was an incredible conversation because we even go deeper into even, and this was where it got wild. And I honestly am still trying to wrap my head around this. But even one of the people who proposed the theory of evolution, let me see if I can bring up his name, Alfred Wallace. You guys are going to see all these links below, but Alfred Wallace, who even started to doubt the theory of evolution as he kind of went on in his life. And so I'm just leaving this all as a teaser for you guys as you guys dive into this episode because it's absolutely crazy and just I don't know. I'm just energized after the conversation. So you're gonna have to let me know what you think of this conversation as you get into it. So here it is. This is episode 080 with Esoteric Eddie.
Traveling to consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
All right, back into it. Esoteric Eddie, dude, thanks for being here, man. I know I've seen quite a few of the podcasts you've been on. You've been on some big name podcasts. You've had a wild podcast experience, in my opinion. And just the information that you talk about is really captivating. And I'm very curious to see how like this ancient wisdom really ties into almost like this new age of spirituality. So thanks again for being here. And I'm excited to really dive into this stuff.
Yeah, thank you, man. Glad to be here. Thank you to everybody listening. Namaste.
Namaste as well. So, dude, Esoteric Eddie. First of all, where did you get this name from? Right, it's a very kind of mystical name.
Well, I've been an artist for like pretty much all my life, and so I've always liked nicknames and like coming up with aliases. And years ago, like around 2020, when I was like starting out, when I was writing my Lucifer book, I was kind of revamping my social media and all of that, and it was just a quick little whim, really. I was just like, well, because I used to be a musician, a music artist, and I had different names or whatever. And as I was getting into this new life, um, as an author and as a YouTuber and a documenter, I was just kind of like playing with different names, and I decided to just go with Esoteric Eddie. I wanted to incorporate my name. I wanted to be more authentic to who I am as a person. Because my past life, I had like all these different music names or whatever, but I just wanted to be Eddie. To be honest, I just wanted to be Eddie, but I knew I couldn't just go as Eddie, so I had to like add something to go along with it. And all the work that I've been doing was focused around the esoteric, the occult, the conspiratorial, all of that. So I just threw the esoteric in front of it to go along with it, and it seemed to work. People really like it.
It has a nice little ring to it, and it sticks, and it definitely is very much in alignment with the things that you're doing. And so, what you mentioned in there was that you came across a past life somehow, and I always find those so fascinating. So, what was your experience like with that? Like, how do you know that this was a past life and what occurred in it?
Oh no, sorry. I just mean like a past life, as in like prior years in this life. Like,
Gotcha.
yeah, I was,
Because
I
sometimes
was,
we have people here who like channel past lives, and I've experienced some stuff, and so I was like, oh, let's start off there.
no, not yet. I mean, I've had strange like stuff like that. Like I've had some really deep deja vus, and I had a concussion when I was in high school, and that like knocked me into a weird hallucination for a little bit, where I pretty much saw alternate realities for a little bit. And also, I've had a seizure before. I had one seizure, and then when I came out of that seizure, kind of same thing too. I was like configuring back into this reality out of some other weird reality for like a few seconds. That was a trip.
Whoa.
But
Whoa.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, do you want to dive into that at all? Should we break that down? Do you like, because I feel like it's kind of weird, right? Like, especially whenever there's head trauma involved. I I completely understand people are like, maybe the circuits are misfiring, things are connecting at a different in different ways. The physical brain isn't orientated properly. So I can see the proclivity to be like, okay, that didn't exist. That wasn't real. That reality is a figment of your imagination. But, I'm sure, especially as I was reading your newest book, we can see even this reality is a figment of our imagination. So how much do you say, whatever it was that you experienced, and maybe we should start with what you experienced, but maybe we should like kind of guide that towards like, did something happen where you're like, this was a different reality I was experiencing, even though like the physical body in this reality wasn't operating correctly? Like, what did you see? How did you kind of interpret that? And what did you make of any of it?
sure, sure. Yeah, my entire life has kind of revolved around just overall weirdness, like spiritual weirdness, esoteric, occult, conspiratorial things. So I've been on this path since I was a kid. But the first, I mean, of course, we all experience deja vu, so that's not like abnormal. But I've had some pretty, like, very just profound deja vus, as I'm sure many of us have. But as far as like the concussion and the seizure, those were a little more specified and intense. But the concussion happened first, and I had that when I was like in freshman year of high school. Basically, the story is I was going down a hill on a bike while my friend was riding on the pegs, and the bike had no brakes, and we're going down this hill really fast. And at the
Oh,
bottom of the hill is this like busy street. And so we're freaking out, like, oh man, we're gonna get run into traffic. So I'm like, no, I got this. So like I quickly hit like a right angle turn to avoid the busy street, and we get out of the way of the traffic. But as soon as we hit that turn, we hit a curb. And so my friend goes flying off the bike. And then unfortunately, I go flying off the bike straight towards a big cement street light.
oh,
And yeah, like just immediately hit it. And my left side of my face hit it, and I spun around it, went flying, and I was immediately knocked out. And
oh,
I
geez.
yeah, and I came to, what must have been like a few minutes later, but I was still moving because when I came back, I was like halfway up the road, with my shirt off, holding my face, yelling, while my friend was walking next to me, like in just utter shock. It's like just staring at me. And so, yeah, my body was moving. I was still somewhat conscious, but just not there. And so when I came back, I was like, everything was just like very, I don't know, it was strange. I was being birthed again. I was like having to like realize like, oh, I'm here in this reality again or whatever. So once I came to and kind of like configured here back into my body, we just walked to his house, and I was pretty much just sick for the rest of the day. Like I was just nauseous, and I actually threw up on his carpet, and his mom got mad at me. Like, so I'm like
Little
cleaning
did
up
she
the
know.
throw up. Yeah, I'm like cleaning up the throw up as I'm like dying, and then my older brother picks me up, and he starts making fun of me a little bit, like teasing me, like, "Don't go to sleep. Like, if you go to sleep, you're never gonna wake up." As they say when you have a concussion.
For sure.
And I actually did go to sleep. I fell asleep while watching a World War II documentary, and so sometimes I mess around and say that I'm still there, like I'm living in a dream. But
Jeez.
but I remember, when I had hit the street light and when I came to, like, there was this moment of flashes, and I, like, saw, like, an alternate reality. Like, I saw the life that I was living, and I saw my house and stuff like that, but everything was, like, kinda just flipped a little bit. Like, there's all these weird little subtle changes. Like, my house was, like, flipped and stuff like that, and so, that was weird. I just, like, I don't know what that was about.
And was that right before you hit it?
That was after I hit it. So
Okay.
after I hit it, and when I was coming to, and I was like holding my face, screaming, I just had these flashes of like these weird alternate realities. They weren't super strange. It was just like these very subtle little like Mandela effects, if you will.
Mm.
If it's
Do you feel
that
like
was
that's
that
just like
one.
your do you feel like that's your brain getting rewired, or do you feel like you were actually, on some sort of parallel time, like experiencing some sort of parallel version of yourself, like intuitively? And I know this isn't going to have a lot of it's going to be difficult to make this like a very factual, concrete type
Yeah.
story, but like intuitively, did you feel like you were on a parallel universe? Did you feel like you were your brain was just making different wrong neurological connections? What were you feeling?
Well, I mean, we could interpret it both ways, but with what I know now, I think the brain is really just a tool for us to tune into different realities. And so if we knock it hard enough or if we ingest certain psychedelics, we can tune into other realities. So maybe, yeah, sure, we could look at it as, yeah, my brain was just rattled and I was just kind of hallucinating or whatever. Or we can look at it as if, my consciousness was literally just rattled through the different tunings of what the brain tool is. And then maybe I was picking up these alternate realities, these alternate dimensions, because that wasn't the first time that or not that wasn't the only time that had happened. Like as I was saying, I had a seizure many years later, when I was like, I don't know, 25 or something around there, and that was really strange. Like it was early in the morning. I was with my boss, and I was just kind of feeling woozy, and it might be an effect, a side effect of the concussion that just surfaced many years later. I don't know, but I was feeling woozy in the morning, and I was like, "Yo, man, I gotta lay down." He's like, "Okay." So I just went to go lay down in this like little patch of grass, and I just remember looking up at the sky, and there was no pain, there was no nothing, no fear, nothing like that. I just like laid down and felt really tired, like I had to take a nap. And as I looked up at the sky, everything just kind of faded out. And according to my boss, I was having a seizure. I was freaking out, whatever. And he was like slapping me, trying to wake me up. And eventually I came to, and again,
Hope Hopefully not in the face, dude. That is not
what? Yeah, he was like
you're
slapping
having
me,
a
like, "Hey,
seizure, I'm gonna
wake up!"
slap you in the face. Like, what? Jeez, oh man.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I
Oh
guess
my
he was just
gosh.
freaking out, like thinking I was dying or something.
Yeah.
But, I came to, and as I came to, it was so hallucinatory, like, his face was morphing into, like, hundreds of faces, and, I heard only what I could describe as, like, thousands of noises all at once, and it
Whoa.
was just, like, music, voices, just, like, almost like everything I'd ever heard, like, just coming at me at once, and, that's all I really remember, and I remember having this big smile on my face too, like, for some reason, I had this big smile on my face, but then once I realized what happened and where I was, like, it just went away, and I was like, "Oh, well, I'm here again," and so, yeah, I mean, we can interpret it as, like, just my brain rattling and malfunctioning, but again, I think that the brain is just a tool to interface into realities, and, it's just like, uh, I guess kinda like a turtle shell in a sense, like, the turtle
Mm.
is inside the shell, and but that doesn't mean the turtle is the shell, and the shell can be damaged, and if the shell is damaged, the turtle might move different, might act different, might live different, but it's not the actual turtle, it's just the turtle having to deal with the damaged shell. So I view it in the same way, the brain is just a tool to interface into realities, and that tool can be tampered with or damaged.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and it's even having me think like, if there are all of these different, let's say, arguably infinite realities that are going on around us, it really fascinates me how if all of that, because it seems like that's true, especially with what you're saying here, especially with everything I've experienced in my life. And I know there's even studies that they've been doing where they can tell that, the brain and even every cell of the body is essentially being tuned to a certain frequency, if you will. And from hallucinogenics, from meditation, from breath work, you can tune it into a different reality, a different frequency. So where it always gets really interesting to me is where it's like, how is it that the brain or the body can consistently get tuned to this exact reality? if you will? How can it keep coming back to this one? Even if you have crazy head trauma, even if you have seizures, like how is it that we're kind of finding our way back to this, let's say at least very similar, very familiar reality? And maybe I'm even answering my own question there, where it's like you need to kind of train yourself, right? You got to train yourself to keep adapting. You got to train yourself to keep seeing the world in new ways, or even aligning yourself with the reality that you want to experience. Do you want to experience being an author or a podcast host? Well, you need to start almost doing the things, or tuning your brain, tuning your signals to that reality that you do want to experience in your own life, or at least more permanently.
Yeah, I agree, man. I mean, whatever this reality is, this dimension, this universe, I mean, it seems to be where we're programmed to be. And that's why it's kind of so hard to get out of it. Like all the yogis and ascended masters, that's why they are the masters. They've reached some sort of level to be able to leave it at will, but it's so hard programmed into what we are. And so it's like we always come back here, and as like reincarnation teaches us, at least in certain aspects, the goal is to break that, to break these cycles and move past whatever this learning grounds program is.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of a path I'm on right now, is really diving into all those yogis and ascended masters. But I do want to, let's bring it back to you though, at least, because I that's something we could get lost down very easily. I do really want to like bring it back to kind of more of your expertise of what you've been studying for years and years, your history, and from like a high level, you kind of started out, and please correct me where I'm wrong with this, but you kind of started out diving into, occult, ancient wonders, ancient worlds, the biblical text, the biblical almost narrative that's been constructed. You referenced your first book of Lucifer, and you found your way now to more of this, like, I don't even know how to describe it. Maybe we'll just leave that as a cliffhanger of how you'd even describe consciousness, let's say. So let's dive into maybe like the first. Did you remember? Do you have a feeling of the first time that you were magnified or mystified, or curious about, these ancient civilizations and their impact on us today?
Yeah, man. I grew up in a religious family, not like uber religious, but I grew up in a Catholic and Christian home. And so I was always fascinated with the Bible. I think that's kind of really where it started. It started with the Bible and the stories. And I just remember really liking the stories, and really being fascinated by the legends and how mystical they were. And so that was always in my subconscious. And as I went through my younger years, I'm sure I probably watched like movies too that probably played a role. But I always go back to this one memory that I do have of reading this book when I was like in first grade. And the book was about like dinosaurs and knights and dragons. And so it was really cool. But I remember there was like this section in the book that talked about the Holy Grail and like how knights were looking for it. And I remember the picture to this day. It was like a cave with a bunch of artifacts, and in the middle was like this golden cup, the Holy Grail. And I thought that that's what it was as a kid, just this really expensive golden cup. And so I always wanted to kind of be an explorer too as a kid. I always had this dream of going out and like trying to find artifacts and stuff like that. And so all these things kind of just stayed in my subconscious. And as I grew up and started having certain experiences and listening to certain music and reading more, it just kind of blossomed into the career that I have now of just actually looking into these things in full depth.
That's pretty crazy. And so it sounds like then the Bible has really shaped the way that you view the world. Did you go through like a phase of questioning it? Did you, like, what's your, I guess, what was your journey like with how you kind of view the Bible? And maybe, and honestly, I'm thinking about it now, the more that I've looked at you, it seems like the Bible has probably been your almost template, or like it seems like it might be that cornerstone that has propelled you throughout your entire journey with looking through ancient history, and how it's even kind of shaped us today. So, what What was it, I guess, in particular about the Bible that really fascinated you?
Yeah, it's I always say it's kind of like the core of all of my work. Like almost everything kind of comes back to it in one way or another. But it's played a silly little role, I guess if I could say like a it's played a very like intriguing role throughout my entire life. And I guess one moment for sure that played an integral role was when my mom told me the story about King Solomon. And of course, as in esotericism and occultism, like Solomon is a very huge figure. So it's kind of interesting that she told me that story about him. And she basically just told me, that he was the wisest king and that, God had asked him, hey, like you've been a great servant. So just whatever you want, let me know. And Solomon, in response, only asked for wisdom. And because he was so humble and asked God for wisdom, God gave him all the riches to go along with it. And so my mom told me when she gave me a Bible, like around 8 years old, she told me,
Hmm.
be like Solomon, you pray to God for the wisdom to understand his word. And so that just fascinated me. I remember like getting down on my knees at like 8 years old and like sincerely praying to God, like, God, like all I want in this life is just wisdom, like the knowledge to understand like what's going on, what all of this is. I just prayed to God wholeheartedly for knowledge. And so maybe in some part, like that's what this is all about. Maybe he's just been answering that call, and that's why I've been on this path. But that's just like one very personal and spiritual experience that has played a role in all of this. But also as a kid, the whole demon thing, the whole hell and demons and Satan thing played a huge role in shaping my psyche. When I was a child, like I was afraid of demons. Like I thought they were real in the sense that I was being told like they're like everywhere and they're trying to like get us and take us to hell and stuff like that. So that damaged me as a kid to a certain extent. And as I grew, I started to kind of question all of it. I'm not sure where that questioning exactly came from, but I've always been an
Well,
independent thinker.
what was your viewpoint of demons whenever you were a kid? Was it like they're buried under the ground and there's a fiery pit under the earth that's gonna grab me by the ankles and pull me down? Or what did little esoteric Eddie think demons in hell was?
I kind of just always thought I always thought they were spiritual. I didn't really think of them as being like physical beings living in a physical place. I always thought of heaven and hell as some other dimension. And I always felt like demons could manifest as like ugly creatures, but I always felt like they were ultimately just energetic beings. And I had strange experiences growing up, things that to this day I'm like, man, I don't know if that really did happen or if that didn't happen, but just weird things like noises, things knocking around, voices, stuff like that. And so, but I think a lot of that was me just my psyche, my sub psyche playing tricks on itself because I was so I believed in them so much. And that's a whole
Mm,
nother conversation
you
about
were almost
about the sub
creating them
psyche.
yourself.
Exactly. And I remember too, like being a kid when I started to question the Bible, like my cousins would be like, "Oh man, like you can't question the Bible. That's like the worst sin." And that I remember that moment too, and I thought that was so strange. Like what? Like why can't we question the Bible? Like I was so intrigued by that we weren't able to question it. And the fact that we weren't able to question it, that's how I knew there was something there to be questioned.
Mm,
And
mm.
but it all
One of the best quotes I've ever heard was "The truth is not afraid of questions."
yep.
Truth
Yeah.
is never
And
afraid of questions, I think.
yeah, I like that. Yeah. I always say, h- how can knowing the truth hurt you? I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical thing because it can hurt you, but
Mm,
what bad can really come from knowing the truth other than your emotions being hurt, your feelings being hurt from realizing what you've been taught is a lie? Other than that, once you accept the truth, it's like it only makes you stronger. So
right.
I I
Right, it
had
only
to I had
empowers
to
you.
Exactly, and that was one of the reasons why I started to do this is because I had to heal that inner kid because like he was so fearful of demons and this and that, I remember when I was a child, like my other cousin, she used to taunt me with the Book of Revelation. It was funny. She used to start like reciting the Book of Revelation and the end of the world, and that used to freak me out. I used to cry, like I couldn't read the Book of Revelation. I
Whoa.
thought it was so scary. But I don't know. As I matured, something happened. Something flipped where I was like, you know what? Like I'm gonna face this stuff head on. And so I started to just do my research and go hard, and I was empowered by it. I was empowered by the knowledge and the information. And now I don't fear death. I don't fear hell. I don't fear demons, anything like any of that stuff anymore, you know? So, and that was one of the reasons why I decided to write the Lucifer book, the Lucifer Mystery Revealed, to help people deprogram and release themselves from the indoctrination that was done to them so that we can start to live this life more liberated and actually spiritually elevated.
So what is the Lucifer mystery? If you're revealing something, right? There was something that makes me think that there was something that was kind of blocked from our psyche, or whether someone misconstrued something throughout history. So what is the Lucifer mystery? And then let's just start there. What was the Lucifer
Sure.
mystery?
Yeah. So I wrote the book. It took me 2 years to write it. I dropped it in like early 2022, basically late 21, early 22. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to set out and kind of just look at this character of Lucifer and simply dig into its historicity. You know, I always kind of start with a question whenever I start to do these big projects, you know. And the question here was, where did the history of Lucifer come from? Like, where did it all start? And so when I started to dig into that history, I found pretty quickly that Lucifer never existed in the Bible. He never actually existed as a character in the Bible. That
Whoa.
character, that archetype, was put together through centuries and of kind of just misconstrued understandings of the Bible. So the Lucifer mystery is that Lucifer never actually existed. We kind of created that archetype through these loosely connected stories throughout the Bible and also these extra biblical stories
Well,
that
so
we
then,
also added onto it.
well, because in my mind, though, Lucifer is the snake in the Garden of Eden, right? Isn't that who Lucifer is? Is the snake, and he's the embodiment of evil? Isn't that what? So what? Whenever you say that he's made up, what does that mean?
Well, yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's another one of those stories that is kind of just added onto the Lucifer mythos. But if you read the Garden of Eden story, I mean, the name Lucifer is never used there. And so what I mean specifically is this. The entire world learned about Lucifer, of Lucifer, through one verse in the Old Testament. And that one verse comes from Isaiah 14:12. And it's the famous verse we all know. O Lucifer, how art thou fallen, etc., etc.
Mm.
But that that word Lucifer is a Latin word. And so if you were to open up any English Bible and go to that verse, Isaiah 14:12, you will see Lucifer as an uppercase L, meaning a name. But the English was translated from the Latin, where we first got the word Lucifer. But in the Latin version, the Vulgate, the word Lucifer is used with a lowercase l. It's used as an adjective. And in the Latin, Lucifer is comprised of two root words, lucis, light, and fere, to hold or to bring. And that's where the occult got the idea of
Mm.
it being the light bringer. But the Latin was translated from the Greek, and in the Greek, where we would see Lucifer today, we would see phosphorus. And phosphorus is the Latin equivalent of Lucifer. It means something bright, it can mean fire, you know, light. But all three of those, the Latin, the Greek, and the English, were of course translated from the original Hebrew. And in the Hebrew, where we would see Lucifer, we would see Hallel ben Shahar, and what that means is Hallel, son of Shahar. Now, Hallel was an old Canaanite deity, son of another old Canaanite deity, Shahar. And Shahar means morning, it means dawn. And Hallel
Real
in Hebrew
quick,
means,
when you
yep,
when you're saying Canaanite, what's Canaanite? Is that an old religion?
Well, the Canaanites are an ethnic what's the word? Ethnic group. They're an ethnic group that came out of the Middle East, where we would see like Syria, Iraq, Iran, like Lebanon. The Levant, as scholars call it. The Levant are all the lands that are spoken of in the Bible. So the Canaanites
Okay.
were an ethnical group that came out of there that comprised of also the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are considered Canaanites. Um, but yeah, they're now they're not
I didn't mean to
around
get you off on
anymore.
a tangent.
No,
Okay.
you're good.
Yeah, I
You're
didn't
good.
mean to get you off on that tangent. I'm interested on the Lucifer one, but I'm just trying to see how all this pieces together because I've always been very curious, especially whenever it comes to like the language. It's like, okay, this text was, originally written in Aramaic, right? And then translated into Latin. Or is that right? It was like Aramaic, then Latin, then Greek,
Well,
then
Hebrew.
am I Hebrew? Okay,
Yeah,
correct me then where I'm wrong on that.
yeah. The Old Testament, the Torah, was originally written in Hebrew. Um, so where we would see Lucifer, we would see Hallel ben Shahar, and Hallel as a name means bright or shiny. And so that's why it was translated into phosphorus and then Lucifer and then the English Lucifer. And we are told that, this Hallel was the son of Shahar. And Shahar as a name means morning or dawn. And that's why in English we see Lucifer, son of the morning. But it goes even further than that, because the writer Isaiah, he was a royal prophet and a royal scribe. And if you go back and read Isaiah 14, what he's doing is he's writing this polemical uh, prophecy against the Babylonians, because at that time the Babylonians were descending upon the kingdom of Judah and taking them into captivity. And so he was writing this condemnation, this prophetic condemnation against the Babylonians, and saying that they are like Hallel ben Shahar. And now Hallel ben Shahar belongs to an old Canaanite myth. And we know this, as I say in my book, we know this because we dug up what are now known as the Baal cycle texts, or Baal cycle texts, if you will. And these texts are Canaanite mythologies. And the Canaanites and their mythologies are older than Judaism and its mythologies. And so these Canaanite mythologies, we're told of this younger deity by the name of Athtar, who scholars now identify as the Hallel that Isaiah was writing about. And in one of the tales, Athtar attempts to step up to the throne of Baal, but realizes he's not powerful enough, so he steps back down. And
Mm.
so, but what makes this even more intriguing is that Athtar was actually a male rendition of Astarte, who was Ishtar, who was Inanna. And all of those goddesses and Athtar, the male counterpart, are represented by the star of Venus, the seven-pointed star of Venus. And Hallel and Phosphorus and Lucifer in the Latin are all words that could also be used to describe Venus. And it's interesting because Venus is the brightest celestial object in the sky preceding the dawn, preceding the morning. And that's factual. You can go out with the telescope or whatever, or your naked eye, depending on where you are, and you will see Venus rising before the sun. And so, what Isaiah was saying, beautifully stating through metaphors, was that the Babylonians believe that they are like Hallel ben Shahar. They think that they are like Venus, something bright, something of importance, but will soon realize that they are not powerful enough, as they will be overshadowed by the true light, which is God.
Whoa. Okay, let me try to that was a lot of information right there. So let me see if I can try to unpack this, even working it backwards. So it sounds like there's a link here between the word Lucifer and Venus. And now that I'm saying that out loud, I think I remember like in Latin, Lucifer meant Venus, meant morning star, and as you're even just pointing out here. So if we're working this backwards, right? Let's start with the star analogy because I think that's super interesting too, where the sun, the physical sun that we have in our solar system, or the physical sun that created our solar system, is the center of our solar system. There's always, I've seen this analogy with the sun and, if you will, Christ consciousness or Jesus Christ, right? Being the representation of God. And I know when you go into like ancient, when you see like paintings of like saints or anyone who has achieved divinity, they usually have like the gold circle of a sun behind their head. And so then this is really fascinating that you're even making this conclusion or this parallel that Venus, the brightest, you can't really say star, but the brightest object aside from the sun that's in our night sky, Venus, it's almost like trying to be like, you could, I could see how the mind could project that it be trying to be the brightest star. It's trying to rival the sun. It's trying to be its counterpart of brightness in the sky, but it'll never match up to it. It's just impossible because Venus is literally taking its shine from the sun. It's literally using the sun's power in order to cultivate its brightness in the sky. So because of this, and then this is where we kind of get into the way that it was prescripted in the past, or in and you're going to need to correct me if I misspeak on some of this stuff now, is that you're saying that Isaiah was writing up this story because there were people invading, and Isaiah was saying, okay, you guys are attempting to be God, and so it's not going to work out for you. Like, I know how this is going to play out. You're attempting to be God. You're attempting to be like Venus, the star in the sky, and I know that it won't work out for you. So then he kind of writes down this prophecy of, it's not going to work out. You're going to get destroyed because you need to be tuning yourself towards God. You need to tune yourself towards the sun, as opposed to this arguably false prophet of Venus or Lucifer. And because you're doing that, it's not good. I keep saying this, but it's just, you're going to fall apart. You're going to be demised. And then throughout history, we kept translating Lucifer multiple different times. And, at some point in time, maybe it was like I guess we're using the King James version. So now we're attempting to say, okay, it's no longer comparing them to Venus. We're now saying that you're actually the devil. You're the source of all evil in the world, whenever it's not the exact translation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're dealing with basically thousands of years, of civilizations going through these texts and trying to translate them, several hundred years up to like 1,000 years. And so as these different civilizations came in and try to translate this Hebrew and understand it contextually, they kind of misinterpreted and misconstrued certain things. And it all kind of started with the early Christian writers, and more specifically, Origen Adamantius. Now, Origen Adamantius was writing out of the second century, so like the fresh Christian era, pretty much. And Origen Adamantius was one of the first to look at the story of Lucifer and misconstrue it as if Isaiah was talking about an actual archetypal figure named Lucifer.
Now,
And we know this
when did this person exist? When was the timeline here?
the second century, so like the mid 100s.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear second century. My bad. Sorry.
No, it's
Sorry to
all good.
interrupt.
No, it's all good. And he wrote a book called De Principiis, I think in like around 180 Common Era. And he was one of the first. He was one of the first very influential Christian writers. And so in his De Principiis, he says, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, like the prophet Isaiah has revealed to us that there is another power in heaven by the name of Lucifer, and so he kind of like just misconstrued the whole thing. And Origen Adamantius was actually condemned later as a heretic because he had a lot of like psychedelic ideas about the Bible and stuff like that. I think he was a pretty cool dude. Like he had a very open mind about all this stuff, but he was kind of just misunderstanding it. And it makes sense because he was if I believe like a Greek, definitely a European, trying to look at these texts coming from several hundred years before him out of Israel, and so he missed that cultural context because Isaiah was a royal prophet and royal scribe coming out of Israel back in like 600, somewhere between 500 to 600 BC. And at that time, there was no like Judaism as we know it today. It was still being formed. So these people, these writers, they were still tied to the ancient world of the Akkadians, Assyrians, and Sumerians. And so to people like Isaiah, the mythologies of these people, his ancestors, were important. And so he was writing with all of that stuff in mind. So Isaiah knew who the Canaanites were. He knew their mythologies. He knew the Sumerians. He knew about the Sumerian mythologies and all of that stuff because those were his direct ancestors. So he was writing with that stuff incorporated into his writings. And so Origen Adamantius and people like him, they totally missed that. They didn't understand the cultural context in which Isaiah was writing from.
And do you think that that was just accidental, or do you think that was on purpose? Do you think it was just this different way that they were trying to put things together? Like, I mean, it sounds like it was well intentioned, or do you think that they had this intention of maybe more control that they were trying to obtain over the people that were following them?
I think Oregon was well intended, but I think the larger church, the institution, had some more nefarious agendas, and that's what my second book is kind of about, the Anunnaki theorem. We can kind of just segue into that book because this one kind of ties into it. And what's fascinating, what about all of this, as I point out in the Lucifer book and the Anunnaki book, is that all of the Abrahamic faiths are based on the Sumerian tales. And the Sumerian tales is where we get the Anunnaki mythology. As you
Mm.
pointed out, right? So the Garden of Eden story is always attributed to Lucifer. But again, that's just one of those loose puzzle pieces that people kind of just uh, add onto the Lucifer mythos. But they're two different things. What Isaiah was talking about and what the Garden of Eden story is telling us are two completely different things. We just like to put those things together to generalize this force of evil or whatever.
Is there a reason that we do that?
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
for the
it's
most
just
part,
generalizing?
I mean, we as people, I think we're always generalizing because we want to simplify things, but it's mostly at the fault of the church because the church has been the one who's kind of perpetuated this oversimplification of what the writers from the Torah were trying to tell us. They oversimplify it because all they're really trying to do, the institutions, is get you emotional and dedicated so that when they start to pass the tithing baskets around, you put money in there. That's
Mm,
pretty
if
much
you give
all
us
they're
more
doing.
money, then Lucifer won't come after you.
Yeah, that is the bottom point of all of what the institutional churches do. I mean, that's their job. They are employed by the church, and they need to make money. So how do they make money? By keeping seats, keeping people in those seats. So ultimately, their main goal, their main objective, is to get money in those tithing buckets. Um,
And
so
with that being said, I do wanna just point out that I'm sure there are good churches out there. I think when we're discussing this, right, we're talking about the overarching structure that once it becomes too rigid, once it becomes too much in the quest for power, anything that comes in the quest of too much power, it tends to skew that way, right? It's not that every single organized religion, and because this is a problem I had where I was very much like, oh, if somebody's asking for money, if a organization's asking for money, then it's like, okay, now they're just trying to use my spiritual nature, my religious beliefs against me. Whereas it's like, well, pay attention to the energy or the intention behind it, right? It's like, are we actually like just trying to keep up and keep maintenance on our facility, on this church, or are we, highlighting it with what we're talking about here, where it's like, you should be afraid, and if you don't donate, then you're going to hell and you're never going to meet Jesus and all this bad stuff. So I just kind of just want to put that caveat out there for just as a general sense.
yeah, absolutely, man. Like, don't blame the people, blame the institution. There are good-hearted people out there that do care about the Bible and church and their people and whatnot. But yeah, so I think the overgeneralization is lazy, and it gets perpetuated by the institution just because it's easier to do so rather than to actually face these things with the scholarly
And I mean,
mind.
it's kind of ironic you even say that, right? The overgeneralization's lazy. If we overgeneralize every single church as, doing this, out of the spite of other people, then it's like we're falling into the same trap.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because that's what we do as people, because it's almost impossible, man. It's almost impossible to, like, fully understand anything, you know? Like,
Right.
that's why the certain people are masters at just one thing because they've dedicated their entire life to understand that one thing. So in life, we have to simplify things. We have to generalize here and there, but, with the that's why I
Well,
took
let's
time.
get back.
Go ahead.
Right, and I want to get you back. I want to put you back to what we were talking about because you were on a roll, man. With you
Sure, sure.
mentioned the Anunnaki theorem, right? And it sounds like this is that transition point that we're talking about. But it's crazy because I know I've always kind of heard about it. I've watched Ancient Aliens. I've seen the History Channel. They're kind of out there, if you will, ideas. And I know that there's a lot of the ideas that whenever I hear them, I hear them and I'm like, okay, they're mixing these half truths in there. Like it sounds like half this is true, but then they're just like, oh, it's possible that aliens. It's like, so are you saying that there's a possibility? And they're like, well, I guess there's a possibility. And then they clip it and they're like, okay, that's it. So I would love to hear, it sounds like you've done a lot more diving into it. So even for me, I'd consider myself a very, very novice on the terms of Anunnaki and even the history of the world as we know it, because it seems like we're even dating stuff even deeper back. So, what was that transition point, right, between Lucifer and then jumping into the Anunnaki? Like, how do you go from Lucifer to Anunnaki?
Okay, yeah. So going back to the Garden of Eden story, right? Um, so the Garden of Eden story is totally separate from Lucifer. They're two different things. And the Garden of Eden, what we need to understand again is that the writers of the Torah weren't writing this stuff as Jews through the eyes of Judaism. That came later. They were writing this stuff through the eyes of ancient people from the Middle East whose ancestors were the Akkadians, the Assyrians, and the Sumerians, the first major civilizations of the world, as we know of now, right? And so these three kingdoms brought us much of what we use today in society, in civilization, in government, in education. And their mythologies were the very first of mythologies that we uh, dedicated our lives to, that we worshipped. Like the Babylonian Enuma Elish was acted out every year at the New Year festival. The mythologies of the Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Akkadians, they were very prolific. They were very respected. They were widely disseminated. And so the writers of the Torah, they were descendants of these people. They were writing
And what
with
timeline are we at?
well, with the writers of the Torah, as we know, that was all put together. The Old Testament was put together around 600 BC.
Okay.
600 BC. But the Sumerians, the supposed first civilization of our current timeline, they go back to about 4000 BC.
I love how you say current timeline.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There is definitely more.
But
So,
but this is actually probably a really important point, right? Is that you're saying current timeline. So it tells me that you're even open to more history being revealed, and it seems to me, especially with the younger Dryas and all the information that's coming out, with regards, and kudos to like Randall Carlson and um, Graham Hancock, because it seems to me that the anthropologic community as a whole, and probably other geological communities, they become very ingrained in this is the way it is. And there's no room for us to be wrong here versus even just the way you said it, the current timeline, the current way that we're perceiving this, the most up to date version of history as we know it is this. So I just want to kind of commend you on that, that it having that mindset, I think, is going to go a long way, because then it helps you to expand your mind around the possibility of, okay, we like our current timeline is that this was the oldest, and now, in the future, it's like, okay, well, we have a new one. We figured out there was a new civilization 14,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago. And I think that'll do, just putting that out there, that I think that's a huge and very powerful way to view this type of information, especially as a historian as yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, we gotta be open minded and keep it open. But so yeah, these writers were writing from that historical context after have just coming out of those thousands of years of mythology. And so all of that is reflected in the Bible, especially the earlier texts. And so the Garden of Eden story, as we now know, was loosely influenced by the Sumerian mythologies. And I'll give you an example. So in the Garden of Eden story in Hebrew, the word that is used, of course, is not serpent. The word that is used is nakash. Now, nakash can mean either serpent or wise one. And the writers of the Old Testament were playful in that way. A lot of the words throughout the Old Testament have these playful meanings, and it's meant to be that way. There's an exoteric meaning, esoteric meaning, and all things going on. And so that Nakash, whoever he was represented as
Mm.
a serpent and represented as a wise
Whoa.
one, right? And so now all Assyriologists, the early Assyriologists out of the 1800s, have concluded that the Sumerian god Enki was the influence for the serpent in the Garden of Eden, because Enki, as we now know through the Sumerian text and the Akkadian text and so on, he was like the number one figure in our ancient mythologies that was regarded as the god of wisdom, the god of knowledge, and he was also known as the god of the serpent. He was symbolized by a serpent. He was also known as the god of the deep waters. Snakes, they can go underwater. Some snakes they swim in water.
Whoa.
They also go underground. And so Enki was always signified as being the god of wisdom and the god of the serpent. And
And I
so
don't I don't know if you've ever, sorry, real quick before we get
yeah,
into Enki. I don't know if you've ever been aware of this, but I just want to make this a part of your knowledge. If you don't, is that I know with ayahuasca, I did ayahuasca once, and I know I've heard a plethora of stories where people bring up this idea that a snake will kind of come to them, and it's also comes with wisdom. Like, especially with me, the snake is kind of the proverbial symbology that ayahuasca kind of brings to you, and it's it's tying essentially that those words together as well, which I find very fascinating by you dropping this nugget of information as well. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or
yeah,
not, but it's a fascinating piece.
yeah. The snake has always played like a very important role in many different ways, like with the Kundalini Shakti as well. That's what I touch on that a little
Yeah.
bit in my newest book, having to do with consciousness, which we can get into later a little bit later. But yeah, so this figure in the Garden of Eden, this serpent, was loosely based on Enki. Not just one example, but to me, the most prolific example, profound example, that the Old Testament was based on the Sumerian mythologies comes from the story of man being created. So in Genesis 1:26, if we are told the story of creation, and if you go to any English Bible and open it up to Genesis 1:26, what you will find is that it says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And there is plurality there. And
Yeah,
a
let
lot of
us.
scholars, yeah, the us, them, uh, or no, the us and like us. Anyway, so a lot of scholars and theologians have been stumped at that plurality, and they'll try to come up with some sort of explanation. Is God talking to himself, or Jesus and God talking to each other, or whatever? But the truth
Well,
is,
and you
the
translated this
reason.
back and when you were translating this, it was plural as well in the original text as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it's fascinating, and we're lucky that they left the plurality there, because once you start to research why the plurality was there, everything starts to make sense. So I'm glad that they left the plural there instead of looking at it like, why is that plural? Let's change it to the singular. But the reason that there's plurality there is because in the original Hebrew, the word that is used is not God. The word that is used is Elohim. So when you plug it in, it should say, and the Elohim said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And Elohim is a plural word in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew. And basically what it means it is the powerful ones. You can loosely translate it into the powerful ones. And so when we plug that back in, what we're reading is the powerful ones said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And so now we ask ourselves,
Whoa.
well, who are the powerful ones? Well, let us turn to our ancestors' historical context. Who were the powerful ones to the writers of the Torah? What did they know? All they knew, all they had to go off of was the mythology of their ancestors, the Akkadians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Sumerians. And so for the first few thousands of years of human history, again, according to this current timeline, within those first few thousands of years, who did we worship? The Anunnaki. So the writers of the Torah were referencing the mythology of their ancestors when they told us the story of man's creation. Because in the Sumerian text, we are told, at least in 3 occasions, that we were created by them through a mixture of their blood and what they call clay. And that is reflected again in the Bible when we are told the powerful ones made us through clay.
Whoa, where does it say that? That made us through clay?
Yeah, the Bible, the Bible, in the Bible, we are told that God made Adam through clay. He took some clay, or he took some
Uh,
earth, some dust, and he fashioned Adam out of the dust, out of the clay, the earth. And that is also the same exact explanation we are given in the Sumerian text. The Sumerian texts tell us the same thing. They tell us, again, on at least 3 different occasions, 3 different texts, that we are created by them through an admixture of their blood and clay.
yeah, it says, what is this? Genesis 2:7. And the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So what? So how do you break this down then? Are you so what? So then we're saying Anunnaki, and I think historically, or at least the way that I've perceived Anunnaki, are this alien race or alien beings. So what's your perception of this, right? If we have this information that the Elohim, and that's something also I'm curious about, because I feel like I've seen Elohim written as a plurality, but then also as a singular, referring to the one singular God, and maybe that's something we could talk about as well. Is it well, let's start there then. Is Elohim purely a plural word, or can it also be singular? Because I feel like I've seen that before.
It is used in some like singular contexts throughout the Bible. I'm not well versed on what those verses are, but technically, and any rabbi will tell you this, that technically Elohim is plural because of the ending im, cherubim. I don't know, any word in Hebrew with that im at the end makes it plural, and the singular
Mm,
of Elohim would be Eloha, and Eloha is used throughout the Old Testament as the singular of that word.
okay,
But specifically in that creation story, I mean, it is obviously being used as a plural because it is saying, and the Elohim said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So in that story, there's no doubt that it is being used as a plural. And again, it's being
gotcha.
these writers were just reflecting on their ancestral mythologies and kind of simplifying them and also molding them into a new mythos, which would go on to be the mythos of the Jews.
So then this ties into where the Anunnaki come in, because the word, let's try to divvy this up, right? Because my interpretation of Anunnaki is always alien, because I've only heard it in that context
Yeah.
with regards to ancient aliens. So, but based on the groundwork that you've laid here, the whenever the Torah was being written, the Elohim were just basically the ancestors of the past generation, and who they believed, or they referred to as the Anunnaki. And then this is where Ancient Aliens comes in and says, okay, Anunnaki are aliens. What have you uncovered about this? Are they aliens? Are they a divination of God? Where have you pieced together what the Anunnaki are?
So this whole like alien thing primarily comes from, of course, Eric von Daniken and Zechariah Sitchin. More specifically, Zechariah Sitchin. Eric von Daniken, yeah, he wrote like the Chariots of the Gods and stuff like that, but he didn't go as in detail as Zechariah Sitchin. And for those who don't know, Zechariah Sitchin, he passed away in 2010 at like 90 something years old. But he was the one who first started writing about the Anunnaki in great detail back in the 70s, and with his Earth Chronicles series, which I believe is like 7 books. And I've read all of them, and some of the other works that he did. And and
Dedication.
yeah, I started reading them in high school, and that was one of the things that really set me off on this journey, because prior to reading his work, I was just kind of like loosely going through life with this whole religious indoctrination and stuff like that. And then I always had these questions, and when I read his book, I finally had all those questions answered, because he took all these ancient texts, these Christian texts, these Judaic texts, and even in some cases Islamic texts, and analyzed them to the T, and brought forth the whole Anunnaki theory. So, in other words, I like to say, without Zechariah Sitchin, there would be no Ancient Alien TV show. There would be no Gaia TV. There might be, that's maybe a harsh assessment, but I'm just saying that to point and stress to how integral and important his work was. Like, he was the guy who brought the Anunnaki stuff to the forefront, starting in the 70s. But he was the one who first suggested that they were these astronauts that came from planet Nibiru, here in search of gold, and created us to be miners and slavers for them. He was the first one to suggest that, and then everybody else ran with it. So that's where that comes from. It's from Zechariah Sitchin and
Mhm.
his work. I still love his stuff. I think it's very fascinating and entertaining. I don't really agree with his conclusion anymore, though, and I'll get into why. But before I do, I think it's also important to also just go into a little bit more into the explanation as to how the writers of the Bible, the Old Testament, were writing from that context of knowing about the Anunnaki. The Bible tells us about the Anunnaki. The Bible tells you about the Anunnaki, but they just don't say it by that name. They don't call them by that name. For example, and I'm just trying to find the quote here in my notes.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, so when the Babylonians were descending upon the kingdom of Judah, before the Bible was put together, before the Torah was put together, right around 600 BC or so, when they were descending upon the kingdom of Judah, we are told in the Bible that at that time, the Jews, the Israelites, were losing their way, and that they were going back to the way of their fathers. And we are told, um, in in Jeremiah, I believe. Yes, there we go. In Jeremiah 11, right before their kingdom fell to the Babylonians, we are told that the people have returned to the sins of their ancestors. They have followed other gods to serve them. And so we're consistently told throughout the Old Testament that, the people used to worship other gods. And God even says himself, I am a jealous God, and you should worship no other God. And we're also told in the Bible, sorry, I'm trying to find the quote here. Oh, here we go. We're also told in the Bible in Joshua 24, by God, that long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. So again, we're told consistently throughout the Bible that the people used to worship other gods. And what's interesting is that the first time the God, or sorry, the first time the name Yahweh is presented in the Bible, Yahweh being the God of the Bible, the first time that name is presented is in the story of Exodus, and it is presented to Moses for the first time. And Yahweh, this monotheistic God of Judaism, tells Moses, he says that your ancestors knew me by different names. They knew me as El Shaddai, but you shall know me as Yahweh. And El Shaddai
Mhm.
was a Canaanite god. That was a name that belonged to the Canaanite mythology.
Whoa.
And so when we're looking at this, okay, these people used to worship other gods. You know, who are these other gods? Well, when we look at it historically, anthropologically, archaeologically, you know, factually, in history, these other gods were the Anunnaki. And so all of that stuff was based off of the Anunnaki mythology. But through time, it was simplified, generalized, and boiled down to monotheism. And when monotheism eventually and officially took hold, the whole mythology of the Anunnaki was forgotten and phased out and literally buried underneath the sands of time as the kingdoms fell.
So then based on what you're saying is on based on what you found, Anunnaki was a blanket term for the polytheistic religion that existed before the Abrahamic Bible. Is that an accurate way to phrase that?
Yeah, basically, you know, our ancestors, our Middle Eastern ancestors, were polytheistic and they worshipped the Anunnaki for the first few thousand years of our timeline, of our current history. And then they were slowly, that mythology and that worship was slowly phased out as um, Judaism and monotheism started to rise up and take hold.
Mm.
And then, of course, once Christianity came around and followed the same blueprint, then it was pretty much game over for all of that ancient history. I mean, it was just
Well, so
slowly
then
forgotten.
I'm really curious then where so your representation of the Anunnaki is that was essentially just a blanket word for the polytheistic gods that existed prior to this renaissance of a monotheistic society. Now, compare that to I'm blanking on the guy's name. You mentioned him earlier in the 70s who wrote that book, who first
Zechariah
mentioned the
Sitchin.
Anunnaki. Zachariah Sitchin. What Zachariah Sitchin put into place is that his belief is that the Anunnaki were these aliens or, ancient astronauts, if you will, beings who traveled from other planets to Earth that created the human race in order to mine gold for them. So where exactly your does your understanding of Anunnaki split off from his understanding? Like, what is there certain evidence that you both interpret different ways that he took and said, okay, they're from a different planet. They created us to create gold versus where you're saying, okay, it's just the polytheistic gods of the time.
Yeah. So I'll break it down with three major key points that we differ on. And the first one being the gold thing. Now, that's his main, one of his main points is that they came here for gold. Now, nowhere in the Sumerian text is that mentioned. Now, it is never mentioned that they came here for gold. But also, to Sitchin's defense, he never said that that was directly stated in the Sumerian text. A lot of people over the years have kind of just regurgitated that, reiterated that, without actually reading his books. And that's
Mm,
what I
kind of like the
love about
Lucifer
his
problem.
books. Exactly. Like, that's what we do. We're great at doing that as humans, you know, and
Yeah, right.
it's useful for certain things, you know, the generalization. But uh, his books, I love his books because they're super detailed and like the just like the research that he does and the breakdowns that he does are fascinating. And he came up with the gold theory after not just studying the Sumerian text, but studying Mesoamerican texts, texts from all around the world. And by studying all these texts from around the world and breaking down the etymology of different words from different languages and breaking down the hieroglyphs and pictographs of different cultures, after doing all of that, and looking at the Bible, he finally concluded, I think they came here mining for gold. So that's how he came up with that. And I don't necessarily agree with it. I think it's a fascinating journey of research that he did that to end up at that point, but I don't necessarily think that's
Well,
true.
was there a text? Was there like an Islamic text or a Hindu text? Was there some other text that he references that you maybe haven't looked at that he was bringing that into? Or do you think that he just kind of pulled that out of thin air of saying like all these other underlying things were happening and it feels like it's pointing towards mining gold?
Well, again, man, like you really have to read like the entire 7 books to understand how he came up with that theory, because he goes into all these crazy details. And I'll give you an example. My favorite book of his is The Lost Realms, where he dives into the Anunnaki connection in the Americas. And me being of Mexican descent, that was really fun and fascinating to read. And in that book, he just goes crazy hard in detail about like what these ancient structures might have been used. And to him, he thinks like all these ancient structures on like Lake Titicaca and that area were actually just all quarries. He thinks a lot of these places were just quarries, and that they were being used as like metalsmithing workshops. And he also kind of just
Mm.
looked at the simple question as to, why do we even worship gold? Why is gold so fascinating to us, specifically in the ancient world? It had no technological usage in the ancient world. So he simply asked, why was gold so important to us? And as he sifted through all of the ancient explanations, for example, in the Americas, he found that our ancestors, when asked that question, told us that gold was for the gods. When the Spaniards came to the Americas
Oh.
and they asked the natives, like, why, what are you doing with all this gold? Why is it so precious to you? And they told them, well, this is for the gods. And the specific term that was used in the Americas, according to Sitchin, was that the gold was the gods' tears. And so there was a connection to gold, to the gods, to these ancient sites, metal smithing, and all of this. So eventually, with all the details that he collected, he had no other, conclusion other than these Anunnaki were here creating quarries and metalsmithing workshops and using us as laborers to mine for metals, and including gold. For what
It's
purposes? Probably for the technological purposes that we now know of.
yeah, and it's that's interesting. So I'm interested on your opinion of this. I want to, I guess, because my thought process is, especially whenever you look at churches, especially ones that were built in Europe, it brings upon this feeling of like awe or like this like grandiose, bigger than myself like beauty because of like all the intricate details that they do whenever it comes to these magnificent structures that are used to give praise or give divinity to now the monotheistic God. And so I feel like, and again, this is just my past biases coming up, that I feel like that gold almost holds that same awe-invoking spire, right? Like, for instance, whenever we rank things, right, it's like bronze is third, silver second, gold's like number one. And it's almost because like that energy has that rising energy. Like, yeah, bronze is nice, but silver, like silver's a little bit more beautiful. It's almost that little bit more, beauty to it. But then when you compare both of those to gold, that's whenever it's like, whoa, like no, like this is the thing of beauty, like this is the most beautiful mineral. So I mean, even with all that being said, like what's your opinion of his interpretation, my interpretation, and like how does that all relate to your interpretation of gold and its place in this Anunnaki story?
Yeah, so the gold thing, I think it's fascinating. I think there could be some truth to it. I just personally haven't examined that one as I have the other two key points that I'll get into. So again, I'll say like he could be right. He could be right. But the thing is that I think most people are missing is that he never said that was explicitly stated in the Sumerian text. He came to that conclusion
Mm.
after examining a handful of cultures, a handful of languages, and a handful of stories. And when I
So you're kind of
approach it
just not
that way,
sure with the sorry to interrupt. You're just saying you're not 100% sure where gold sits with it, just that he hasn't linked that
yeah,
to a text specifically.
yeah, and I think so. He's probably right, to a certain extent. I think it's strange that we do have this affinity to gold in ancient times, and that it is connected to the gods. And there are these strange structures that, when examined, do kind of resemble like metal smithing or quarries and stuff like that. So there was some kind of ancient mining operation going on. So I think he could be right. There's just no conclusive evidence, and neither was his conclusive. It was simply an observation and a conclusion after examining all these different pieces. But um, the other two key points where I kind of contend with him
Yeah.
are, one being the whole thing with Nibiru. All right, that's another huge part of his conclusion and his presentation, is that they came from this planet called Nibiru. And Nibiru is mentioned in the Sumerian text, specifically in the Enuma Elish, which is their creation text, their cosmological tale. And in the Enuma Elish, the protagonist Marduk, and the protagonist's name has changed throughout time. The one that we have today, the protagonist is Marduk because that's when the Babylonians kind of took over and changed the name. But anyways, uh, so in the Enuma Elish, the protagonist, he kills the antagonist Tiamat, and at the end, after the battle, he's being celebrated, and he is given 50 different titles, 50 different names. And one of those titles is Nibiru, Shepherd of all the gods. And that's it. It just says, "Oh, he is Nibiru, Shepherd of all the gods." I think he says like the star and the shepherd of the gods. And so again, the same thing, the same way Sitchin examined all these different texts and tales having to do with gold, he did the same thing with Nibiru. He went around the world and examined all these connections to some sort of wandering star, some sort of forgotten planet that comes here every so often, and kind of just concluded that, well, there must be some wandering planet that circles our solar system every so often, and that must be the planet that these gods came from. And I think it was just a little disingenuous to base that all off of that Enuma Elish verse of praising Marduk as Nibiru, shepherd of all the gods, when that was just one title out of the 50 that he was given in his victory. So
It's kind of like
that's
picking and
basically,
choosing.
yeah. But it's okay. I mean, that Sitchin did what nobody else had done or has done, and that is look at all of these things and try to really come up with a conclusive answer as to why there are all these strange similarities around the world. Why are there pyramids everywhere around the world? Why are all these mythologies very similar? So that is what is great about him, is that he was able to take all of that and come up with a conclusion, whether it was correct or not. At least he tried to. And so I contend with him on the gold thing just because, again, it wasn't a conclusion, it was an observation. And the same thing with Nibiru. It wasn't a conclusion, it was an observation. And at the final key point that I split off from is that they were ancient astronauts. After looking at the Sumerian text myself, I came to the conclusion that, if they were real, these people that our ancestors spoke about, the Anunnaki, if they were real, I think that they were from here. How they got here or how long they've been here, I don't know, but I think that they were from here and that they were survivors of a cataclysm. And the reason I think that is because of a tale that is told to us in a Sumerian text known as um, the Enki and World Order, the Enki and the World Order text, which is one of the oldest texts known to man. And in the Enki and World Order text, we're told that Enki, the god, is going around and setting up civilization. He creates the calendar, he's creating agriculture, and he's creating structures and society. And as he's doing this, he's delegating and employing other gods to different parts of society. Like, you will be the god to watch over agriculture, farming, and this, and that. And so these are supposed to be the gods of creation, right? They're going around doing all this. And if you were to read this as like the ancient alien theory, you would say that these gods, or sorry, not the ancient alien theory, but if you're reading this through like a theological lens, you would say that these gods are creating civilization, they're creating life. But when you really read it, you see that they're not really creating civilization, but it's almost as if they're restarting civilization. And I think that because there's a line in the text that states, Enki gave resources to the Martu nomads. So here are the gods of creation going around creating the calendar, creating society, building structures, domesticating animals, creating agriculture. And then off to the side, there's just these random Martu nomads who had no resource, and Enki had to supply them with resource. So that
Mm.
tells me that these Anunnaki were not starting civilization, but they were restarting civilization, and that these Martu nomads were disenfranchised people who weren't as fortunate as them to have survived with resource after the cataclysm. And the reason I think the cataclysm is a part of this is because when we step outside the Sumerian text and look at geographical, anthropological evidence, we find that there were cataclysms, huge cataclysms in our recent past. So, again, piecing all that together, I think that the Anunnaki were simply survivors of a cataclysm and that they were wise enough to rewrite themselves into the history books as the gods.
Whoa. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I've watched a movie or so where they talk about like when that civilization was restarting, is that almost random people, if you will, would like kind of come to their shores, or they were like these world travelers who were spreading wisdom and knowledge that had almost been lost in the last cataclysm, and like almost this like worldly reset occurred, and yet there were these people of knowledge that like brought with them the knowledges that you're speaking of, agriculture, how to build structures, how to build certain things. And they almost were like, once they established it in a certain area, they would like go off into different areas. And what this is actually reminding me of now is something we kind of talked about at the beginning of this, where there's these like Hindu or rishis, or these Buddhist masters or monks who have been able to, and maybe this is actually our path into the next step of this, and I'm just at the beginning of my understanding of this as well, where there are these masters who have been able to kind of transcend their physical bodies. They're able to almost manipulate the physical world or reality. And have you experienced this? Is this almost what had occurred, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 years ago? Is that, there were humans that figured out this way to transcend the physical body. And I'm having a hard time describing it because I'm just learning about this now. But they figured out how to transcend this physical body, and then be able to materialize and dematerialize in different time and places in history. Is this kind of where you're going with all this? Am I onto something here, or am I just talking crazy?
No, I mean, I think it's possible, man. I like to think that this earth has produced many, many civilizations, and that's even true with what we know now. I mean, the Sumerians were not the first. We know that's true because we have places like Göbekli Tepe that stretch like 10,000 years older than the Sumerians, so we know that there were other civilizations prior to the current timeline. We just haven't uncovered enough to really know what they were about or what that history was. So I think this Earth has produced so many different civilizations. Our current timeline is only about 7,000 years old. I mean, that's nothing. That's several generations. So to think that all that's ever been has happened within these 7 years is pretty arrogant. And so I think there have been many, many worlds, many, many different types of people and different types of civilizations. And with that being said, I think, yeah, there probably were people in the past who have realized the truth about consciousness and our universe and have ascended. And some of these might be the spirits and masters that have visited us throughout our current timeline. So I think that's all very possible.
So then where are you kind of at then? So we kind of, if we're going along this, it's kind of interesting to me the way that your books have kind of come about, right? With in regards to like, it started off with Lucifer, and then it kind of transferred into like this understanding of the Anunnaki of, okay, well, maybe they weren't from this other planet. So then what is your what is your idea? Where do you sit with what the Anunnaki were? Were they just this belief structure? Was it just this belief structure of multiple different gods? Because historically, if we're talking about like ancient, what was it, like Roman mythology and Greek mythology, you had one god who was in charge of like the god of love or the god of agriculture, the god of this, and I think traditionally the way that we break that down is almost they were these mythological representations of the best way to cultivate love, the best way to cultivate money or mercantile, or the best way to do certain individual things. So whenever you've kind of gotten to this next like revolution of, okay, the Anunnaki was actually just this polytheistic ideology, how does that tie in then with how we were talking about earlier? I don't think I have up it, but how we were talking about like with Genesis, that the actual creation of man, like was this kind of a like just a story, or was this more literal whenever they were writing these things?
I think it's a blend. Again, it's like we're trying to simplify what actually happened. And I think when we look at the anthropological evidence, it does point to something strange happening in our recent past with some sort of genetic tinkering. And I talk about this in my newest book a little bit. So right now we are what is considered Homo sapiens sapiens. We're not Homo sapien anymore. We're Homo sapiens sapiens. And our current skeletal structure that we have is only about 100,000 years old, which isn't a lot compared to the millions of years that hominids have been around. And so our current skeletal structure is very, very young. And also, our current type of consciousness that we have, according to anthropologists, is even younger. It's only about 50,000 years old. So, the abstract way that we process reality and animate ourselves and understand things, that type of consciousness that we have right now is only about 50,000 years old. And so we're a fairly new creation in the grand scheme of hominid history, because hominids themselves go millions of years back, and or at least hundreds of thousands of years. And so, when we couple that with the ancient texts, which tell us that we were deliberately created through basically a science experiment by these beings, they kind of corroborate each other. So I think there's something to that. I think that at some point in our history, as Zecharia Sitchin also famously points out, I think that somewhere along the history, somebody or some group of people might have, selectively bred at the very least, or did actually genetically experiment and create what we are. We're told by every ancient text having to do with the gods that we were created by them through an admixture of some genetic process to be workers for them. And our entire life still reflects that, here on earth through the institutional habit of slavery that we go through every day, But to answer your question, what do I think they were? I think, again, it was a mixture of all of that. I think there's just I think there's a history that is just long forgotten, and it exists as a memory now, a collective memory. And this collective memory was rewritten into these stories. And apart from that, I think we also have a habit to anthropomorphize nature. And so I think that we kind of incorporated the anthropomorphized mythos of nature along with the real history of who our ancestors, the Anunnaki, were.
What
We
do you
kind of
mean?
blended those
What do
two
you mean by
together.
anthropomorphize? What does that mean?
So when you anthropomorphize things, it's like when you give character to inanimate things, like the
Mm,
god of the wind. Like
okay,
to give a name and a character to the wind would be to anthropomorphize it. And so I think our
almost like
ancestors,
make it a human.
yeah, so I think what we're dealing with here is a complex uh, history of actual humans, actual hominid humans, naturally evolving And those natural humans who naturally evolved into higher states of consciousness, I think they had an anthropomorphic religion of like a more paganized religion of nature. And then at some point, some more evolved people, the Anunnaki will call them, came along and started to intermix, at the very least, intermix, selectively breed. And that is also reflected in anthropology. Anthropologists now know that there was a stretch of time, a really long stretch of time, at least like 100,000 years or so, where hominids, where Neanderthals were intermarrying with Homo sapiens at the very least. So there was a weird time where these lower forms of hominids were mixing with these higher forms of hominids. And we
Whoa.
could look at that coldly, as an anthropologist, or we could look at it through the esoteric lens and say that, there was probably a high end civilization that the Anunnaki belonged to at some point in our very distant past, and those people underwent a cataclysm and had to survive that. And as they survived that, they kind of mixed in with the natural humans, the natural evolving hominids. And so that history, that occurrence, is what influenced all of these early mythos.
Was that integration piece? Is that what you're saying? That's what influenced it? Was that there was
Yeah.
this? And do you think that those were from? But you're saying, or are you saying that those weren't from another planet? Whereas that's kind of the traditional sense versus, I guess you're not too sure where they came from, right? There's evidence maybe, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth here, but you're thinking that there's evidence that suggests that it could have just been earlier civilization or a different civilization that created our species versus, alien species from off planet coming to this planet. You're kind of in the gray area of like not too sure what this text actually points to.
Yeah, pretty much. And I could be wrong. I just, for myself, I'm just concluding that I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they came from. So I'm concluding that these Anunnaki beings, I think they were hominids for sure. They look like us. We were told they were like us. But they weren't human by definition, because a human is what we are. But we're told by the text that we were created by an admixture of them and clay, or probably some lower hominid form. So to be a human is to be basically a mutt, to be a mutt between two different beings. So whatever the Anunnaki were, they were a more pure genetic of wherever they came from. And so I think that at the very least, they were from here, from probably a much more distant past. So by the time that we came along, they were probably already dwindling out. They were probably already becoming extinct for some reason, because of the cataclysm. Maybe most of them died because of some ancient cataclysm, and the survivors are the Anunnaki, are those small few that rewrote themselves into what would become our history as the gods. So in the very short, yeah, I think they were from here. They survived some cataclysm, and they integrated with the naturally evolving hominids that would become us, and integrated with them. And through that integration, we, Homo sapien and Homo sapiens sapiens, were created.
So where my mind is kind of going with this, right? Where traditionally speaking, we're kind of viewing this at a physical level. We're talking about this in terms of the physical nature of the Anunnaki being here. And where I've kind of been, especially the nature of this podcast being a little bit more esoteric, being a little bit more in the consciousness, the more spiritual nature of it. And even kind of going back to when we were talking about the self-realization that saints usually have, or that Jesus would have, they come to this place of knowing that divinity within themselves. They come to like aligning with that divinity. Do you feel that there are is any information in the text that you've read, any of the information you've read, where it might it might not be that there was a kind of cataclysm, as you put it, right? Maybe they weren't actually in danger, but maybe is there a possibility that they were evolving spiritually or from a conscious place, that they had almost over evolved their state of being on earth and said to themselves, hey, maybe we need to give some of this knowledge to the next primates up. Maybe these new primates coming up, they are showing the similar characteristics that we see. They're seeing, we can see that they have the spine that would be capable of housing the chakra centers. They would be housing this ability to evolve themselves spiritually. And they found a way to either download that information or bless us in a like a little mini kundalini type awakening, right? Like there's this little energetic imprint into our spine that they were kind of figuring out how to do. Like, so, that's kind of the whole breadth of the question. But to break it down, it's like, is there any indications in the text you've read that it was more from a consciousness point of view as opposed to like a physical dying out? Like does that do you kind of see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is some truth to that. And again, looking at all of it, it's like, I mean, they were whoever they were, and they were wise and they knew a lot of information, and the God Enki imparted some of that on us. And even the book of Genesis reflects that when we're told that Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit. And when they eat the forbidden fruit, it's stated in the Bible, again in the plural text, the plural context, they have now become like one of us, a God to know good and evil. And so it all is pretty much about consciousness. Whoever the Anunnaki were, these ancient beings, they did their thing, and then we came along, and we were given consciousness, we were given information and knowledge, and through that we were given the responsibility of having that. And whoever the Anunnaki were left, they disappeared and they're gone, and we had to now stand here in full responsibility as newly created beings to take that consciousness and nurture it. And that's what we've been doing. And that's reflected in the mythos. It's also reflected in anthropology, where again our Homo sapiens sapiens skeletal system is only 100,000 years old, and then at some point within the past 50,000 years our consciousness somewhat basically just turned on. It's like something just in ingested it, or something inserted it into us, and we just suddenly woke up and realized what we are and what we're capable of doing. And some people like Terence McKenna would say that was due to the stoned ape theory, where our ancestors started to ingest psychedelic mushrooms, and that caused them to that caused their brains to double in size and have their consciousness expand. So in all different ways, it is reflected that at some point we were basically just given this privilege of having a higher consciousness, and with that privilege came the responsibility. And that's reflected also in the philosophy of reincarnation, as it is told to us by Swami Bhaktivedanta, who I reference in my newest book. Swami Bhaktivedanta tells us that the human consciousness, as of right now on this earth, within this earthly kingdom, is the highest form of consciousness, and we shouldn't be light about that. We should take that as a responsibility to further elevate it and to help further elevate the consciousnesses around us. So I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it is about consciousness, and it is about having the privilege of being self-aware and taking that forbidden fruit of knowledge and nurturing it further on.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because even as I'm diving into kind of like those texts and even reincarnation, right, is it's this loop that, and if you create, ill things, you create karma, you create these negative ripples. It's like you got to keep reincarnating until you hit a certain point where you become, and this is where I'm kind of still trying to piece this together, but it seems like once you break that karmic loop, you become free of karma. And once you break free of karma, that's when you are now able to, and let me know if you have any thoughts on this, because I'm still trying to figure it out. But once you break that karmic loop, you're then able to become of God realization. You're able to kind of have this almost like divine perception of the world, and you're able to almost become what, and to use your words, I would describe as an Elohim. You would almost become this ascended master of the world. And it seems like that's whenever this gets a little weird. It seems like that's whenever now we could be taking our, it gets weird. I'm going to say it gets weird in the sense of now having this thought process that the Anunnaki, the people who were of this world maybe before, right? Like hypothetically, right? Like this is where my mind's going, is that hypothetically maybe 200,000 years ago, this whole process started before, and because everything works in waves and ripples and repeats itself, this essentially would have happened 200,000 years ago. The species that existed got all the way to the point that they transcended this world, became the Anunnaki, became the Elohims, and then said, wait, well, our last gift to this world before we leave is to take the most advanced monkey species that we have on Earth and somehow use our mystical powers in order to imbue in them the self-realization that, well, it's almost like the spark of God that exists in the universe. And whenever I say God, I just mean the energy that unites everything. We know we're so elevated as ascended masters, and likely we have the blessing of that one energy to bestow it in this little monkey creature that then is going to go on in 100,000 years. It turns into us, me and you having this conversation. And even the fact that we're now having this conversation, it seems like we're on the brink of becoming that next version of Anunnaki.
Yeah. Yeah, man,
Am I
that's a
crazy? Tell
fascinating.
me if I'm crazy. Bring me back if I'm crazy here.
No, yeah, I think that's spot on, man. It's a cycle of passing the torch, you know. And right now, we're like passing the torch on to AI in a certain sense, you know. That, I mean, that's a whole different conversation, but that's basically what we're happening is we're like trying to pass the torch on to like AI and integrate ourselves in with the technology to take it to a whole new
Mm,
level. You know, the Anunnaki, like they, if in your explanation, you know, they implemented that gift. They passed the torch on to the hominids, the humans, and for whatever reason, we're finding it necessary to pass it on to technology, you know. So yeah, I think it is
interesting.
this kind of like this game, the circle of life of passing on that torch. And who knows, maybe 1,000 years from now, if God forbid, you know, we go through some crazy cataclysm and there's only a few survivors, who knows what that mythos would look like, you know. So I think it is just kind
Yeah.
of, I mean, even in our own history, right? Like in the Americas, the United States of America is only about 200 years old. There's nothing older than 200 years within the confines of the United States of America. Yet we have civilizations like China that are thousands of years old. Think of all the different stories and people and places that have existed even in our timeline that are gone and forgotten. So, you know, like Rome is gone and it's still there. We still know of it, but it's gone. Its entire people, its entire history is pretty much gone, you know, essentially. So I think that is a greater part of what this is about. It's like continuing that torch, you know, passing that torch of consciousness and self-realization and the gnosis of God. It's like passing that on, you know. That is the great work of every generation.
Yeah. And so speaking of that gnosis, your own gnosis, how have you taken this so we went from Lucifer, then you dissected the Anunnaki. How is that how have the Anunnaki kind of transitioned you into this third book you've written? How has it taken you into this realm of examining your own perception of reality, your own consciousness, and like what does that even mean for the rest of us? So but let's even just start a little bit before that. Like what how is it how have the Anunnaki inspired you to take an examine and a look at your own perception of reality and to even write this newest book that you have?
Mm, yeah. When I fully, I guess, realized the impact of the Anunnaki mythos years ago, I realized that if anything, what it did was made me realize the responsibility that we have to be godlike. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. You know, nobody can be God, but even the Bible tells us that God made us in his image. So the importance of the Anunnaki mythos for me was like, man, we are the most fascinating creation, the most powerful creation. We hold good and evil in our hands. And so with that responsibility of consciousness comes, you know, the duty of nurturing that and the duty of doing righteous things with it. And so I try to carry my life being appreciative of the spirit machine that I am. You know, as you said, to elevate ourselves to the level of Elohim, to elevate ourselves to the level of our ancestorial Anunnaki, and not just defaulting to our lowly hominid nature. But when it comes to my new book, that came to me through a download, a spiritual download. After I finished publishing the Anunnaki Theorem mid of last year in 2022, I was kind of at a standstill with my work. You know, I'm always working. I'm kind of a workaholic in my content life, in my esoteric life, and in my actual life as a plumber. But I came to a standstill, and I was kind of just wondering, you know, well, what's my next book going to be about? What's going to be my next big project? And at the time, I was getting ready to write a book about Werner von Braun, you know, the famous ex-Nazi scientist who was integrated into NASA and fathered rocket science. So I was going to write a book about Werner von Braun and his prophecies about the fake alien invasion. Or so I thought. That's kind of like, I was like, well, I could do that. Why not? But one day I was at work plumbing and I was underneath a sink and I was fixing the sink. And then out of nowhere, I just had this flash. I saw my entire third book just in a flash. I saw it all. I saw the colors, the words. And the very first thing that really stood out to me was the name, the title. I just saw the crystal lattice mind illusion just flash in my mind. I saw it all in that
Whoa.
instance. And then I knew right then and there, I was like, this is it. This is the next book. And I've always been fascinated with psychology, with consciousness, but I guess I was ready. It was time to really look at it and to write the book.
Dude. You got me wanting to go fix my sink now. I need to go
Hey,
screw in some bolts or something.
it's a mystical experience.
Dude, that's so cool. So all you saw was the name, but did when you saw that name, did it like inspire in you? Did you know what the book was going to be about?
Yeah, like I knew what it was going to be about, like in essence. Like I had the feeling. Like, you know, some people say, you know, you have the feeling first and then the information comes later. That's kind of what it was. I saw the title and then I saw like the color of the front cover and I already knew right away like what the structure was going to be and everything. So I just felt it. Like I could feel the information more than anything. And then slowly that feeling um, transformed into actual work. You know, as I sat down, I was like, okay, like, what is this going to really look like? What is it really going to be? And I start to work on the chapters and break down the organization of the chapters and all of that. And then once I actually got into the research part of it's always fun for me because I always know there's going to be a plethora of things that I learned that I didn't know before. So whenever I write these books, the journey of going from start to finish for me is actually a learning journey. It's a journey of education and taking what I learn, writing it down, organizing it, putting it into a book form, and then presenting it to the people.
So that's so cool. And so what was like the biggest thing or some of the bigger things that you learned whenever you were researching this book?
There's a I mean, there's a lot of cool things. And real quick, if anybody is interested, you can find the book on Amazon or on my website, esotericeddie.com. And if you're
We'll
not
have it
ready to
linked down
purchase
below
the
as
book,
well.
appreciate it. And if you're not ready to buy the book, you can watch the free documentary version on my YouTube channel. Um, but yeah, I
Oh,
learned so many
that's
cool
dope.
things, man, for sure. One of them that was really interesting was had to do with the theory of evolution. So I learned that the co-founder of the theory of evolution, Alfred Wallace, who was a colleague and friend of Darwin, who helped Darwin formulate his notes on his theory, later renounced the theory of evolution and later realized that the theory of evolution could not account for or explain the complexity of the human mind. So Alfred Wallace, the co-founder, later renounced the theory and said that it could
Whoa.
not sufficiently explain how and why
No
human
way.
consciousness was formed. Yep.
I had no
Yep.
idea.
And
I had no idea that he renounced his own belief in it.
yeah, we have his letters to this day, and they're fascinating letters where he talks about spirituality and minds and stuff like that.
Dude. So what was his name? I want to look this up.
Alfred Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace.
Alfred Wallace. What is that? Renounces theory. You think that's a solid way to look it up?
I think so. That should pull something up.
Charles Darwin, birds. He helped discover evolution, and then sent it to Darwin. I don't know. I'm not seeing anything that it's not very popularized. Do you know? Maybe he doesn't
Alfred
believe in it.
Alfred
Alfred Russel
Wallace.
Wallace.
Yeah, Alfred Russel Wallace. Maybe type in Alfred Russel Wallace spirituality, maybe.
Is he like into spirituality now? Is that why or something?
Well, what happened is he started going to a lot of seance parties, which were a big
Okay.
thing in the late 1800s. And it was because of the seance parties that he changed his mind, because he started seeing some like really weird things happen there. Like he would watch spiritual mediums like call in spirits, and he would see things levitate, and he saw spiritual beings like manifest out of thin air. A lot of wild things. So because of that, he realized like the human mind is way more complex than just some process of the brain.
And so he
Maybe
wasn't.
if you
So like he got to these seance parties, and because of these seance parties, why would that denounce the theory of evolution to him?
Well, to him, it was just like there's a quote, and I have it in my book and in the documentary. But to him, I mean, the theory of evolution basically states that everything that the body has produced through evolution produced out of necessity. So slowly everything that the body has formed it out of
Mm.
necessity. And to him, after seeing all these crazy things happen at these spiritual parties, he simply asked himself, what would be the necessity for these things? So to him, there was no reason for a human body or a hominid to acquire these powers if all we were created to do by nature was to eat, sleep, and reproduce. So to him, there must have been some sort of
Oh.
higher power, some higher creator that bestowed upon us these abilities.
Yeah, and I think I found a good article right here. It's in Psychology Today, and it's called Alfred Wallace's Problem. It's saying exactly what you're saying. It says, ironically, Alfred Wallace, the co-founder of the theory of evolution, also rejected the idea that evolution could explain language. Wallace asked how man's, quote, superior intelligence, end quote, could result from natural selection, the basic principle of evolution. That would expand a creature's powers. Sorry, I'm kind of Wallace. Let me rephrase that. That was kind of like a weird reading there. Had some weird pauses. So Wallace asked how man's, quote, superior intelligence, end quote, could result from natural selection, the basic principle of evolution. That would expand a creature's powers only to the point at which it has an advantage over the competition in the struggle for existence. Specifically, Wallace wondered why humans have, quote, a large and well-developed brain quite disproportionate to its actual requirement, end quote. He said that in 1870. He could see no problem solved by language that could not be solved without it, That's actually a very fascinating point. I mean, because you could even develop sign language, which we have today. That is why a language would have been naturally selected, unless language was needed for the survival of a species. The theory of evolution could not explain its origin, thus being the origin of language. Upon hearing Wallace's concern, Darwin replied, "I hope that you have not murdered too completely your own and my child." Whoa. Oh, dude. And now here's where the institutionalized theology comes in. It's like I'm so gripped by this thing that made me who I am today, that made me intelligent, that I don't want to let go. Yet
Mhm.
Darwin was never able to specify just how language evolved. Whoa, dude, this is crazy. Why does nobody talk about this? Wallace's
Right.
concern Wallace's concern, which has come to be known as, quote, Wallace's problem. Okay, so it's called Wallace's problem, assumed that language evolved as a unitary entity. A unitary entity. It is now widely recognized, however, that language did not emerge full blown. Words had to evolve before grammar, of course. If Wallace focused on words instead of language, the problem would have become, how were words selected from animal communication? That's a much simpler question than how was grammar selected. Um, Noam Chomsky, the world's foremost linguist, attempt to finesse his problem by simplifying grammar to the origin of operation, claiming grammar. Okay, now getting into grammar. Um, Suffers from two major flaws. Dude, I mean, that's probably worth a read in its own right. I'll link that article below as well. But that's very fascinating. That's such a good point. What's the point of language? How could that even help us to survive? I mean, you could argue that it's definitely beneficial, right? There's so many beneficialities to language. But from a human construct, how does it help us to survive further? Well, let me think about this and poke holes in this, but if we can communicate better, then we can. So here's the way I'm seeing it. Let me slow down here a little because I'm getting excited, and I know I have a tendency to get whenever I get excited, I'll just like take things in. But here's the thing, right? Is if we have language, then we can communicate better as hunters, as to lay out tactical plans. So my mind saying is like it would make us better hunters. But I guess the question is if we're already sufficient hunters and we're sustaining, then there's no push to become even better hunters, right? Like if we're good enough hunters to sustain life, then we can't. It's difficult to become even better hunters, right? Like there's no evolutionary drive to become even better hunters if animals aren't becoming better prey, right? If they're not becoming better at hiding, then there's no need for us to become better with language.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole thing with language is strange, and I talk about it in my book because even according to like the mainstream anthropologists, the thing that doubled our brain size that allowed us to have the consciousness we have today was language. And they believe that the invention of metaphors and abstract language is what actually caused our consciousness to shift from autonomic animalistic consciousness to the more unique human consciousness that we have. And that also coincides with the stoned ape theory that states that, our ancestors ate mushrooms and through mushrooms created language and through language created metaphors and so on and so forth. So the language thing is interesting. And as I state in my book, all the ancient texts tell us that God created the physical universe through language, through the spoken word. God said, God said, let there be light. And in all of the ancient texts, the Enuma Elish, the Egyptian texts, the Rig Veda, they all state that the very first thing that God did was create the elemental gods or the physical world through speaking it into existence. So there's an interesting component here with language, consciousness, and reality. And it's also interesting how
Right.
what we say to ourselves becomes our reality. And it's also, as I point out in my book, the central reality controllers, the reptilian brain network, control us primarily through what? Images and indoctrination, which are symbols and languages. So
Yeah.
there's something to all of that.
Oh, dude, there is something here. I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something to all of this. And it's so true, right? Because I mean, this is like the bread and butter of the whole manifestation community, the whole energy speak that into existence communities, which is just that, right? You have these things, that these words that are playing over in your head over and over. I'm a I'm going to try to stay to the positive. I know majority of people will go negative, but it's like, I'm this and that, I do this, I do that, and what do you know, the outer world starts to reflect that. I have XYZ, I am in this predicament, I'm in that predicament. But it's like, if you just start focusing on the reality that you desire as opposed to the reality that you currently have, this weird thing starts to occur where that starts to appear in your reality. It starts getting shifted. You start seeing things that you want to see and don't want to see. And damn, it's like, it's also interesting because I like this almost, like, what's the connection there? Because there is a connection there, right? With like language. It's like, did you speak it or did you think it first? And
Mhm.
it's kind of cool because whenever I started learning new languages, I know that the level of mastery is that you start thinking in that language. Like when you start thinking in that language, that's when you start mastering that language. Is because now it becomes just your thoughts as opposed to the actual physical thing. Is, you know what I mean? Like, you're not translating it
Yeah.
one to one. You're automatically in there. And you might also have that experience if you had Spanish in your background as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's important, and the connection. I mean, I don't know the answers to the full connection, but there are two connections that I point to in my book, and that is the number one, going back to the cosmological tales as to how the creator, how God created the universe. Again, we're told that it created this physical universe through the spoken word. And what is word? Word is just vibration coupled with
Right.
meaning. And so the God, right, the creator has the power to manifest things at will by speaking it into existence. And we, as a fractal of God, also have that ability. It's not as powerful, but we do have that ability. We've been given an imagination. We have an imagination, and we can use that imagination. And with our word, we can put that imagination into words and also create our reality. I mean, we are the most powerful being on this earth, if not the universe, apart from God. We can think things and we can design them and we can create them. When the technology we're using right now to communicate was designed by humans, and they were just thought forms at some point first. And so that's one connection. And the other connection is that in science, in quantum physics, we now know that the entire material world is actually comprised of vibrational patterns, vibrational lattices. So everything around us isn't physical. It's not solid per se. It's actually vibrating particle systems. And these vibrating particle systems are the actual vibrational words and they are the vibrational words that the creator uses or used to create everything. So vibration, the physical world, and manifestation, they're all connected in that sense. That speaking things into existence is using vibration. Our entire physical world is made up of vibration, and that vibration is God's word.
Yeah, and this is reminding me, I'm trying to look up right now if I can find it. But I was thinking about this earlier whenever you were talking about King Solomon and how he just only asked for wisdom and God gave him everything. And because I was researching this, because this came up whenever I was looking into kind of like Hinduism. It was kind of like this mix of like Hinduism, and yoga and Buddhism. But it's like there's 10 manifestations of God, and I can't find it right at the moment. But this would be an interesting thing to look up for yourself as well. It's like there's 10 manifestations of him, and it's like vibration, sound, light. I'm not going to be able to remember all of them, but it's like vibration, sound, light, wisdom, devotion. That's five of them.
Talking about the Sephiro,
I'm not sure. The Sephiro. How do you spell that?
Sephirot,
Sephiro. I don't know. I
the
don't think I've
Kabbalah
heard of the Sephiro.
Talking about the Kabbalah tree of life.
Uh, I'm not sure. This looks familiar to it. Let me see here. Um, he says by their attributes, up, down, forward, back. Oh, we just lost Esoteric Eddie. We lost Esoteric Eddie, people. All right, let me pause this and we'll get him back in here. All right, we got Esoteric Eddie back in the chat, guys. Sorry about that. Getting too deep in here. The powers that be don't want us going this deep. This gets the best of us sometime. Let me see here. Superconscious crown. This is similar, but it's not exactly what I was looking at. Discipline. Yeah, no. Wisdom. Yeah, I can't find it exactly. I'd have to remember. Maybe it was something related to like Paramahansa Yogananda. Are you familiar with him?
Oh yeah, yeah, he's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Dude, he's a beast, dude. Let me see if
Yeah,
he has something online.
I was just at the Self Realization Fellowship here in Encinitas, which is actually
Oh yeah?
the one that he used to live at.
One of the original one, right?
Yeah,
What do you think, dude? What do you think of all that stuff?
I love it, man. Like, yeah, he's one of my top five favorite, like, just spiritual people. Like, I'm always quoting him and stuff. I think he's amazing.
Dude, so that was actually the quote that I was bringing up earlier whenever it was truth is never afraid of questions. That was one of his quotes.
Oh, what? No way. That's cool.
Yeah, dude. I did give him the recognition he deserved, but maybe I was supposed to bring it up now.
Yeah, Yogananda, the homie.
Yeah. So then what how has like has he kind of like influenced this like perception now that you have, or I guess we deviated somewhere there, right? Maybe it was in the evolution, but we deviated somewhere there in your experience or like your creation or like the big things that you found whenever researching for
Mhm.
crystal lattice.
Well, he's played a big role in my life for many years. My friend put me on to him, man, like, I don't know, probably 7 years ago or something. But I always saw the book, the autobiography of a yogi. I always saw the orange book, but never really paid it much attention until my friend sat me down and made me watch his documentary. I think it's called like Waking or something like that. And after watching the documentary, I was just so moved. I thought it was so profound. And I remember it was like nighttime in La Jolla, like right by the beach over here. I went outside. I was just so moved. I went outside and I just like meditated like towards the water where I could see the water. And I felt this like surge of like energy, like shoot like out of my brain, like towards the water and then like back to me. And that was just like a really cool experience. And ever since then, about
Wow.
7 years ago, I've just always regarded him as like one of my favorite spiritual teachers. And I love the book. I love his life story. I love his teachings. And yeah,
Yeah.
pretty sure. Yeah, no, I do mention him in my new book. I quote him in my new book where he talks about life being like a dream. But
Mm.
yeah, he's played a huge role. But yeah, there was a lot of cool things I learned within the research of this book. The Alfred Wallace thing being one of them. Let's see, what's another one? There's just so many cool things. I think it was interesting to look at the mainstream theories of consciousness. That was very interesting because I'd never really looked into what mainstream scientists really think about it. You know, what have they concluded? So I didn't want to just talk about the spiritual side of it. I also wanted to give the mainstream some. I wanted to briefly go over what the mainstream thinks as well to give that contrast. You know, and it was interesting to see what they think. And ultimately, there's about four main theories out there on consciousness when it comes to the reductionist or materialist point of view, and the
That's a
mainstream
lot of
scientists.
theories, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. There's four main theories, and I go through them in the book, and but they all state pretty much the same thing. They pretty much state that the brain produces consciousness, and in the way that it produces consciousness is that the brain takes in all the multitudes of senses that it is experiencing at once, and that multitude of senses creates a hallucination and an illusion of a 360 experience. And that 360 experience is what we call consciousness. And I don't agree with that. I mean, it's fascinating, but to me, it only explains autonomic thinking, which I go over in my book. And I think autonomic think we do have autonomic thinking. When we zone out, or when we're just kind of like, whenever we zone out, or the things that happen on their own, like our breathing and stuff like that, that all belongs to autonomic thinking and autonomic function, which is a function of our brain and consciousness. But these mainstream theories of consciousness try to say that our entire consciousness, works off of autonomic thinking. And I don't agree with that. I think what they're explaining is how, the lower forms of consciousness operate, whether it's that of bugs or certain animals, because inherently we know that that's not true. If that's all we were, if all we were was just responding to stimuli, we wouldn't be much different than some of the lower thinking bugs or lower thinking animals. We wouldn't be much different than a robot or an AI. But
Right.
we inherently know that's not true. We have a very unique and profound sense of personality and individualism. If all of our brains just worked the same, then we would just be some weird androgynous type being, through evolution. If that's all consciousness was, then through evolution we wouldn't have evolved to be as individual, and personified people, and we would have just stayed the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, we wouldn't have made this like progress, or we haven't like pushing that will to progress. And this kind of ties back into the evolution, right? It's like we're at the top of the food chain, so why are we still evolving our consciousness, right? Like why are we still making this push? Like, and that might be actually the fascinating piece, right? If we're bringing this back to the theory of evolution, is like there's no point for us to keep evolving, right? There's no point for us to do anything. We can just sit in, hypothetically, I understand that there's some, well, what would the error be in this of staying stagnant? I mean, there's issue with staying stagnant if we start to develop competition between each other. But where this gets interesting is that even if we can approach the world by from an abundance mentality, right? Of saying that there's enough to go around. I can promote your shit, you can promote mine, and we still both win. And ironically, that is the best way to win. So even the theory of evolution is based upon a scarcity model of the world around it. But if the entire world operates off of an abundance model, then that would ultimately disprove the theory of evolution as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I speak about this idea as to why do we need to keep progressing our consciousness in the last chapter of my book. I think it was in our creator's intention for us to ultimately evolve, and I refer to a story in the Kabbalah that kind of reflects this. And there's a story in Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, titled as the Shavira, the breaking of vessels. And in this
Mm.
story, we're told that God created a universe prior to this one. But in that prior universe, God inserted a piece of itself in all of the vessels, or all of the created beings, but that light was too powerful for them to hold. So everything in that universe exploded. The entire universe exploded. And so the second time around, when God created the next universe, which is the one that we are in, God uh, committed what is known as simsum, self-limitation. So God limited the amount of itself that it put into everything, and that allowed everything to be sustained. And so this also, to me, explains why God is seemingly nowhere, but also seemingly in everything. And so I
Mm.
think it's our Creator's intention for us to ultimately evolve consciously as spiritual beings to the point where we will fully understand who we are, what this is, and who it is. But we need to go through a slow progression, or evolution, if you will, to reach that point. Because if it were to just announce itself and announce what all of this is right away, we would not be able to handle that.
Dude, 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 there are so many parallels in what you just said with like the kind of what the Hindus lay out as well, where and especially like a Kundalini awakening, where some people are ready for it really quick, but majority of people, to have that piece of knowledge, to have that deep understanding, to have that deep wisdom, that deep godlike wisdom instantaneously, they even say, would just fry your system. I've read time and time again, and I think even something I was reading by Paramahansa Yogananda, where he met one of the great ascended masters originally and said, hey, like, I'm ready for the next level, like level me up, I want to feel what you're feeling, kind of thing. And he said, no, like, that's for your specific guru to do. And on top of that, if I were to do that, every cell in your body would just explode. Like, you're just not ready for it. And this is crazy too, because even as I go deeper into meditation, I'm re- I'm I'm hitting these new points of like concentration and just realization, where it's like I can feel that I get headaches the next day if I kind of like try to push it. And I can tell, like, because I have that little bit of like, I want to know more, like tell me more, like unlock another deeper version of myself. But I can tell that it's like there's like protecting me, because if I had done that, like the next day I could be completely out of commission, or even in this case, I could, in a weird way, explode my brain. And so, dude, that's crazy, man. That's a
Yeah.
fascinating parallel you discovered there.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I believe that, man. I think that we are meant to be so much more, and we will be. I also talk about the energy grid work that exists around us in the book, and how
Is that
I
like
think
ley
our
lines?
well, no, I think so. As of right now, mainstream science tells us through physics that there are four fundamental forces of the universe: the electromagnetic, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the gravitational force. And those four fundamental forces kind of make up the energies that the physical world operates from. But scientists have been looking for what they call the fifth force since the Einsteinian days, and they believe there's a fifth force that interconnects all of them, which creates that sort of internet throughout the universe. And if we were to be able to tap into the fifth
Um,
force, we could create a massive self-efficient fuel source. And a lot of scientists, such as NASA, have believed that UFOs have tapped into that fifth force, and that's how they can create this technology that defies the laws of physics. But on the more esoteric side of things, some people believe that that fifth force is consciousness, is the creator consciousness, and that our individual consciousness can tap into that fifth force, and we can utilize the four fundamental forces of nature to um, for all kinds of things like telepathy, telekinesis, elevation, even traveling, to and from different parts of the universe, teleportation. So there are so many different possibilities when we theoretically, if we were to tap into that fifth force, which is like the internet energy throughout the entire universe. And so I think it was in
and I
our
think
creators. Go ahead.
I think this is called scalar. The scalar field is what I've seen it labeled as before, right? Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, a lot of different people throughout the years have called it different things. Like Tesla called it the luminiferous ether. And
Okay.
there are two scientists that I mentioned in my book, Vernon Knepp and Ed Close, who came up with this a theory in 2011. I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's like the triadic vortical paradigm theory, something crazy long like that. And in 2011, they realized that the Einsteinian model of the universe no longer worked. That there were phenomena in quantum physics that could not be explained by the Einsteinian model. So they went back and redesigned the entire model of the universe so that it could be explained properly. And when they did that, they realized it could only be properly explained if we implement a nine-dimensional model. So they concluded that we live in nine dimensions, and those nine dimensions are encased in an infinite dimension. And through all those dimensions exists an internet or interfaceable uh, energy known that they called the Gimel. And to them, the Gimel was consciousness or is consciousness. And so I think it's in our
Wait, help me out. Help
creators.
me out with these names real quick. Help me out with these names, because I need to look this up, because this is kind of a really wild thing that we got to break down here.
All right. So if we
So
type
nine
in,
nine dimensions.
yeah, do you want the name of the researchers or the theory?
I guess both of them.
So it'd be Vernon Knepp and Ed Close theory. Uh, okay, so I got it here. It's the triadic dimensional vortical paradigm theory
Okay, I
by,
see that. Okay, I'm looking at it on International Journal of Physics Research Applications. What is this? Highpubs.org? Is that a fair, reputable source?
yeah, I think so. These guys are like legit like scientists.
Okay. All right, well, we'll read the abstract here. Physicists are generally trained in the Standard Model of Physics, SMP. This implies that they perceive and account for only three dimensions of space in a moment in time. So they have it labeled as 3s minus 1t. So time would be like the fourth dimension, right? So there's three dimensions, that's space, and then we're all moving across this invisible time model. So now what they're saying is, however, applying the SMP, so the Standard Model of Physics, which is the three dimensions in time, SMP, applying the SMP, more than 50 significant conundrums, holy shit, have arisen that are unexplained or incomplete. Explaining these within the SMP 4D fabric led to hypothesizing a fifth force, most recently the hypothetical X17 particle. We propose this hypothetical X17 may better be explained as a nine-dimensional or 9D with Gimel. Our model, the NEP-Close triadic dimensional vortical paradigm. Help us out here. Don't make it that difficult. Just
Right?
9D will work. They label it TDVP. And dude, that doesn't even work either. That doesn't even roll off the tongue. TDVP. See, this is the problem with scientists. They
Yeah.
can't work it for the human mind. But
It's like
regards,
it could be nine
all love.
dimensions. It doesn't have to be nine words. Like that.
Yeah, right. All right, so our model, the TDVP, has amplified the physics from four dimensions to nine dimensions, specifically first postulating and then further demonstrating mathematically, starting with derivations. My bad, guys. I should know better. Starting with derivations of the Cabibo, the Cabibo angle, that nine dimensions must exist. Moreover, this data is empirically demonstrated because the neutron, proton, and electron mass energy Gimel equivalents in the triadic rational units of equivalence true. Wow, they pulled it off there. They couldn't do it the other time. As part of the TDVP model, exactly corresponds with the normalized data for the mass energy equivalence volumetric data for these particles in the CERN Large Hadron Collider. This data shows definitively that we exist in a nine-dimensional, finite, quantized, volumetric spinning reality. Okay, let me read that again. The data that they found shows, to their words, definitively that we exist in a nine-dimensional, finite, quantized, volumetric, spinning reality. This is furthermore embedded in an infinite continuity, which they label as 9D plus. And then mathematically, applying this 9D plus model definitively requires an extra third component that is massless and energyless, and they call that Gimel. Okay, so what I'm trying to break down here. Okay, so what they then say is without Gimel, no particle in the universe would be stable. TDVP unifies nature because the same laws apply across the quantum, the macro world, and the cosmological reality. Our 4D experience is simply the physical component of 9D plus existence. Okay, so I'm going to try to break that down into human speak.
Right.
What I'm understanding from this is that they're saying, oh, I don't even know what they're saying. I'm trying to think, but that's difficult to even break it down. So basically that this is what we're experiencing is just like a small fraction of all of reality, which I guess is the most simple way to explain this. What are you pulling from this? Is there a way you're able to help us out here?
Yeah, so after reviewing that and many other things throughout my journey of writing this book, what I've realized in basic, because I mean, yeah, as you see, a lot of this stuff is like heavy science. I had to go through so many papers and documents and to try to even begin to understand this stuff. But the way I realize it is this physical reality that we're in right now. It's just one reality. It's just one dimension. And it's not who we entirely are. And it's not what we entirely are. What we really are is consciousness. And our consciousness, our higher self, if you will, exists in a higher dimension or in a different dimension. And it is projecting an avatar in this reality. So in this reality, this entire universe is a hologram, and that is reflected in quantum physics, and it is reflected in the teachings of esotericism by the sages for many, many years. So this entire universe is a hologram, including ourselves, and it is all being projected from these higher up dimensions. And yeah, that's ultimately how I perceive it.
Dude, I'm reading this thing. I'm listening to you, and I'm like, yeah, that makes logical, like it, like something about it feels right. But there's a piece of me, man, that's like, what in the world are they unlocking here? Like, what, like, dude, this is something that I feel like I need to just sit down and like read a bit. And I don't even know, man. Like, I need someone to make a YouTube video about this that's like actually just like breaks this down with some cool little models that just show us like what's going on. And
Well, if you want to
when
read
did this come
something,
out? Go ahead. Yeah, what were you saying?
and they dropped that theory in 2011, but if you want to read something very similar and much more simple, I guess, is read the CIA document, Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process, if you haven't already. I have a documentary on it. I mention it in the book, but it basically says all of this stuff in very simple. It's like 30 pages. It's only 30 pages, and I think everybody should read it. It does a pretty good job of explaining this spinning model of our infinite universe. But that's
Yeah,
pretty
and
much the
they kind of go
conclusion
into
that these.
do do they go into like the mindset of how to like astral project almost? Like they even talk about how you're able to kind of project your consciousness into different areas of the world or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, they touch into it. Well, the analysis and assessment, the CIA paper that I call the Gateway Project paper, that was put together by the CIA as an analysis and assessment of the work of Robert Monroe. So Dr. Robert Monroe, who I also have a video on, he was a previous radio broadcaster who had some mystical experiences with frequencies, who later realized that through binaural beat meditation, you could
Mm.
harmonize the two hemispheres of the brain, and when in doing so, can induce astral projection. And so the CIA paper was put together to kind of assess and analyze his work and how all that can be possible. But I love this paper because they do a great job of breaking it down scientifically, and they employed at the time Itzhak Bentov, who was a world-renowned physicist, to help explain this stuff. So it's a great paper, man. It does a good job of like breaking this stuff down, breaking down consciousness, our spinning universe, and the infinite nature of consciousness, and all of that. It's pretty cool.
Dude, have you seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats? Because I think
Mhm.
they based that off of this paper.
Yeah, that was loosely based off of Project Stargate. Project Stargate was the actual program within our government that hired like military dudes to remote view. And one of them, the most famous one was John. Let me see if I can pull up his name. It's like John McEagle or something. McConaughey, John McConaughey.
Did he come out and like validate everything that was said like in that movie? I'm sure some of the movie was like Hollywood rendition, but McConaughey.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, basically the program was put together as like a retaliation against like the Russians who were doing that stuff at the same time. During the Cold War, the Russians, the Americans, and the Chinese were all kind of experimenting with psi wars, like psi technology, like with like remote viewing and stuff like that and telepathy. But yeah,
Dude,
John McConaughey, what's his name? McConaughey. Joseph McMoneagle. Joseph McMoneagle, he
Joseph
was like,
McMonagle.
yeah,
That sounds like a made up name. That sounds like a made up name.
right? Joseph
Uh,
McMoneagle. Yeah, that
Mick
does sound like him.
Mon. That sounds like they just made up a fake dude to just like do some sort of their own little psyop, a false flag
Yeah,
operation.
yeah, like Mon Eagle. That would be like what, like one eagle or something? I don't know.
Something like that. I don't know. John, if you're listening, still love you, dude. Just come on the podcast. You can yell at me there.
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
he
have
was
to check
like
that
the
out.
number one. He's got a bunch of videos. He actually works at the Robert Monroe Institute now and helps
Mm.
teach how to remote view.
Oh no way! So would he have been? Would George Clooney then personifying him in that movie? Then is that what it would have been?
I think he would have, if anything, he would have personified Jeff Bridges' character, maybe, or
Oh,
maybe,
okay. Was
but
he the guy
he
that
wasn't.
started it?
No, because Jeff Bridges in the movie, I think he was like the main dude. I guess
He
I
was
don't
like the
know.
leader of their unit.
Yeah, yeah, the leader. Yeah, but in real life, McMonagall, he was just like the most efficient one. He was like the most efficient one to have and most effective one. Like he was used on multiple occasions and he was actually accurate in a lot of his remote viewings and was able to help find like a crashed aircraft and find like enemy bases and stuff like that.
Dude, that's so crazy. I might have to bring him on the podcast. That sounds sick.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Coming
bet
to a
that dude has some
Stargate.
stories. I bet that dude has some stories he's not allowed to talk about on podcasts
Oh
too.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I might get a knock on my door from the FBI if they hear about that.
He's just gonna
Um,
remote
but
view the knock. It's like somebody knock.
dude, what if he's listening to this conversation right now? He's like tapped in when anytime someone says his name, he's just
Oh
like already
no.
hear this. Oh no. Dude, but that's what's crazy too, is like there's got to be some sort of like privacy settings. Like, how do you, and that's what I guess kind of gets weird, right? Like, and maybe this kind of touches back on karma is like, where's like the privacy on that? Like, if he's just like remote viewing into this conversation right now, it feels like there's a level of privacy that would be, maybe this is something I got to talk to him about, but like it feels like maybe that would like be where karma comes into play. Is like, okay, if you do that in this life, we're gonna have to like balance the scales in your next life or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like I've been told by some of my friends who have done a bunch of DMT that eventually if you like abuse it, like the DMT beings will block you from coming back. Like the so like for
Ah,
example, I had a friend whose dad was like super big into DMT and he just loved doing it like every day. But he told him a story that one day he did the DMT and like he had a horrible experience where like these big like alien DMT beings were like just dissecting him and like ripping him apart and were telling him like
whoa,
you need to stop doing this, like you can't just keep doing this every day, like stop coming back. So I think there's something to
dude.
that, it's when you need to respect the spiritual realm, and if you peer into it, unrespectively, that they'll block you or kick you out or do something really like horrible to you.
Dude, this is like probably one of the biggest throwbacks in the show's history right here that you just stumbled on. I just had to look this up in episode 12 with one of my buddies. He did DMT a lot whenever he was a kid, and it got to a point where he had entities that were like, dude, you can't be here anymore. Like, you need to go back and live your life. Like, you're not supposed to be here anymore. And even in that podcast, I brought up exactly what you're saying. I'm like, maybe you're supposed to be in this reality. And like, he kind of had this like profound, like kind of realization of like, oh shit, like, these entities are like, dude, you chose to be human. So go be human. Stop. Like, this will be here at some other point in time. don't worry about this existence, don't worry about this reality, go be human. Like, you have plenty of time to enjoy this, but right now you're supposed to be human.
Yeah. Yeah, we gotta enjoy it. Gotta
Yeah, that's a
take
crazy.
advantage of it while we have it.
Yeah, figure out consciousness. Let's figure out the dimensions though while we're here.
Yeah, just the one out of the nine for
Yeah,
now.
right. Let's figure out this one before we. Well, so that's actually interesting. Does it say that? I'm gonna try to find that again, but does it kind of say in your research, like like when they're explaining this 9D model, does that include like these three dimensions and the fourth dimension of time, and then do they just expand that out to nine more, or like what did you find with that?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And what made them one of the things, as you read it earlier, one of the things that led them on to believing that or realizing that was this thing called the Kabibo angle. And the Kabibo angle is this anomaly that couldn't be explained by the Einsteinian model. And what the Kabibo angle is, it's just a strange, like arbitrary thing that particles do. But basically, what particles do is that like they phase in and out of existence very minutely. And so this phasing in and out of existence is strange. You know, an Einsteinian model could not explain that.
Mhm.
So they realized that that all things, all particles are like phasing in and out of existence, and the reason they're phasing in and out is because they're passing through these nine dimensions, and so we're tapped in. We're tapped into the nine dimensions. It's just it's an illusion, you know. This all of this is a holographic illusion, and we think that we're here, but we're really tapped in through these different dimensions, and we can move higher and higher up through them deliberately. But I think we need to wake up to that somehow.
It feels to me like this comes back. I mean, first of all, with this like phasing in and out, it's really interesting because even this kind of goes back to Paramahansa Yogananda as well. He always talks about how, this perception, this reality that we're dealing with is like a movie reel. It's like God is the light, because this goes back to that manifestations. One of them is light, and so God is light, and then everything is just these shutters of pictures, kind of like how a movie reel will go through, and it's just a bunch of pictures, and he's just the light that's kind of getting portrayed through it. But then it has those stutter frames, and I'm assuming that's what you're kind of saying by this Kabibo angle.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Like I mentioned this other guy in my book, Carl Pribram. Carl Pribram, he was an actual brain scientist for many years. And he's written over like 200 different like essays and stuff like that on brain anatomy, brain surgery and stuff like that. And towards the end of his life, he realized that the brain works in the same way that a hologram does. Um, and in the sense that
Wow.
basically the way holograms work, and I don't know exactly how, but basically how they work is a hologram is produced through the cooperation of photosensitive plates and lasers. When a laser hits the photosensitive plate with the information on it, then the hologram is projected. And so Carl Pribram, this brain scientist, realized that the brain is like the photosensitive plate, and the consciousness, our consciousness, is like the laser. So when our consciousness is inserted into the brain, then our reality is projected. And so that's kind of how that's kind of how all this works. It's what we're realizing is this life here is a hologram. It's an illusion. It's a very convincing one, a very fun one. But
Mm,
ultimately, what we
for
are
sure.
is the consciousness, and that consciousness is being emanated or projected from a higher up dimension.
So this might be it. The holonomic brain theory is a
Yep.
branch of neuroscience investigating the idea that human consciousness is formed by quantum effects in or between brain cells. Holonomic refers to representations in the Hilbert phase space defined by both spectral and space-time coordinates. Holonomic brain theory is opposed by traditional neuroscience, of course, which investigates the brain's behavior by looking at patterns of neurons and the surrounding chemistry. So it's almost saying that there's like this deeper, and this kind of ties back to what the other thing was saying with the, what was it, the NEP clause triadic dimensional vortex
Yeah.
vortical paradigm, is that they're kind of saying that there's this underlying other thing occurring on this physical surface. They're saying that, the traditional neuroscience is saying that, it's patterns of neurons and surrounding chemistry, which to me is interesting. Like it seems to me both can hold true, right? It seems to me that both of these things can be true. Just the holonomic brain theory, right? This is a key aspect of it, is that it's just theorizing that there's something going on underneath it. And it seems to me like we got to get these people in the same room. We got to get Vernon Knepp and Edward Close in the same room with these guys, Carl Primbram. Are they still alive? Are all these guys still living?
Uh, Ed and Close are, or I mean, Nep and Close are, but Pribram's gone, I believe.
He's passed away some time now. Is there anyone taking up his work?
Not that I know of.
There's got to be someone, right? No? Huh. All right. Well, maybe that's for another time.
Yeah.
I'll have to do deeper research on that myself. That's crazy, man, dude. You're tripping on some wild stuff. Do you feel like any of this is kind of I don't know the word for it. Like is there any sort of, let me phrase it this way. Is there any sort of uh, like doubt that you take into this, right? Because I know myself, especially when you get lied to by like the mainstream organizations, whether it's the institution of the church, whether it's like the archaeologies who don't want to change their ways. Do you have like some sort of either practice or like way that you mentally check yourself whenever going down these deep things of like this, the brain being a hologram, right? Like there's a piece of me that like is like, whoa, that's like a crazy thought and really cool. But then there's a piece of me that's like, wait a second, we need to kind of figure out the right way to test this or to validate it before we come on a podcast and to pronounce it to everybody who's listening, right? Like, is there a way that you kind of cultivate this ability to have, let's say, measured doubts or like a measured like measured skepticism? Like skepticism is a little like kind of too far, but like a measured kind of doubt that you take in whenever researching this stuff.
Absolutely, man. When I first started really getting deep into research many years ago, I had a paradigm shift, and that paradigm shift almost broke me. And I think everybody goes through these paradigm shifts when they start to really get deep into their shadow work or their research. And it's known by different things, like the dark night of the soul, or there's other words for it. But I had that paradigm shift, and then I almost lost it. I almost lost my mind, but I had to like kind of slowly retreat. And when I had that, or if I ever have anything close to it, I kind of just step back from it and I just let everything just be processed. And I just, enjoy life and meditate and chill, and then allow the things to be processed before I come back to the work. But after I had that major paradigm shift and had that major break, I came back to it. And when I came back to it, I decided to look at things just through a neutral and somewhat or an unbiased as I can perspective. And so, basically, my work is the work of is as a historian, or an investigative journalist. That's how I view it. So, when I go through these things, I just do the best that I can, as a researcher, to look at the most credible sources, look at all the information that's available, and present that to the people, with the contrast of what could be and what we know for sure to be. That's my job. My job is to bring the facts, and so I try to do that, and I hope that that's what I am doing whenever I present my work. But personally, when I'm looking at things, I again, I just try to look at them neutrally. I don't take anything in too seriously to the point where it's going to affect my mental or physical health. Basically, if it starts to affect my mental or physical health, then that's when I start to question it. But at this point, I've gained a lot of strength and resilience to information or certain life experiences affecting me. It all started when I was young. And when I was young, certain things, certain information would affect me, but now I just look at things neutrally because knowing the truth eventually can only empower you. And so that's how I approach these things neutrally, carefully, and as a historian.
That's dope, man. Is there a lot of do you kind of, because you've been on quite a few podcasts, you've been on quite a few, you got a YouTube channel. Are there common is there like a common thing or a common couple of things that the general public pushes you back on, or things that people tend to be like, maybe use as a point of discreditation for the things you talk about?
Well, so far I haven't gotten a lot of pushback. Mostly it comes from like the religious side of things. You know, um, I don't pay too much attention to the comments, and honestly, I smile at the
It's
comments
probably good.
regardless. If they're good or bad, I smile at them because the good ones are heartwarming, and the bad ones are just funny. To be honest, like I love comedy. I love cynical comedy. So some of the things that people say about me or to me, I just find funny because ultimately, like they don't really know me, and it's funny to see like the assumptions that people make about you. And it's like, man, if only you knew like how I really am,
Well, that's
or
interesting.
whatever.
So are no, that's really interesting. So do you find that the negative comments are usually attacking you as a person as opposed to the information that you're providing?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a little bit of both. Like, again, a lot of it comes from like the religious side of things, like, oh, like whatever, they get upset about me deconstructing religion, and
Mm.
probably the main point of contention that people have with me is that I'm not a professional scholar, but I don't claim to be. I've never claimed to be, but what I am is somebody who has dedicated almost half their life at this point to researching and studying and producing, information having to do with the esoteric, occult, and conspiratorial. But ultimately, I don't let any of it affect me. I just pay attention and focus on the people who want to learn more and who want to show support.
I find it so funny, and maybe it's just the state of where humanity's at. That, but it's like if you don't have a piece of paper that says that you went to school to learn something, that that notion to be like, okay, you're not legit or this isn't real, just because like you didn't go through the system to find it, especially in a day and age where you can find anything you want online. That
Yeah.
I guess maybe it's one of those things that it's just like going to take time for our human psyche to just weed out the fact that, okay, you didn't go to college, you don't have like this paper in hand. And it's kind of comical at this point. I mean, I know, even especially with computer engineering, like you can very easily teach yourself everything you want to know about computers and never go to college at all and get a bachelor's degree, and you could be far more intelligent than people that come out with a bachelor degree. So I find it hilarious that I find it fascinating because I know that that even spans onto the archaeological, the like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I feel for them, man, because a lot of that is just coming from their own insecurities and this like their own inability to get past whatever hurdles they're going through in life, the obstacles that they're going through. And that's okay, man. It's okay, because I know that the information and the reality we are dealing with is so complex. It's so complex and it takes a lot of work to even begin to try and understand it, let alone organize it and present it to the people. And that's just what I do. That's what I do as a passion. It's what I do for work. But you can't please everybody. Can't please everybody, and it's not even my job to please people. My job is simply to
No.
examine these things, organize them, and present them.
Yeah, dude, just keep doing that, man. You're on the right path. I love it. I love it, dude. Yeah, dude, feels like a great time to wrap this up, dude. I really appreciate your time. This was a dope conversation. So I always give the floor to my guests. We talked about a lot of your stuff, but please, I'll drop your links in the comment section below. So if you have any stuff you want to promote, if you have any final words to the audience, this is your time. So please please, Esoteric Eddie, speak freely to the audience with any closing remarks.
Well, thank you, thank you. Yeah, no, I just want to keep it short and sweet. I just want to say thank you again, homie, and thank you to everybody to listening. This has been fun. This was cool. This was a nice like kickback, laid back time, and yeah, just check out the links and keep being you, and let's have fun. While we're here and elevate our consciousness. Thank you again.
Hell yeah, brother. Thank you for being here. It was my pleasure to have you on. Incredible conversation. I know I have a ton of stuff that I need to start looking into now, and very grateful for it. So thank you. Guys, go check out some of his stuff. I started reading Crystal Lattice. It's pretty solid book. It's a pretty solid book. I need to read a little bit more of it, but I'm enjoying it so far. So I know you guys will probably enjoy it as well. I don't have any announcements for you guys. Please share this. Dude, this conversation was insane. So please share it. And by sharing it, it creates a win-win-win-win situation. I win because the podcast gets out to more. Eddie wins because his name gets out to more people. You win because your friend knows that you listen to dope podcasts. And your friend wins because they get introduced to a dope podcast. So with that being said, guys, share it, and I will see you all in the 6th dimension.